As you transition from wakefulness into the early stages of sleep, your body undergoes a profound shift that many practitioners of lucid dreaming and astral projection have learned to recognize and harness with deliberate intention. This experience, commonly referred to as the vibrational state, manifests as an intense buzzing or humming sensation that seems to ripple through your entire physical form, beginning often in the extremities and gradually intensifying as your conscious awareness remains partially engaged while your body drifts deeper into sleep. The sensation might feel like an electrical current moving through your muscles, or perhaps like your entire being is vibrating at a frequency just beyond normal perception, creating a feeling of weightlessness combined with an unmistakable physical resonance that can be both startling and exhilarating to those experiencing it for the first time. This state typically emerges during what sleep researchers identify as the hypnagogic phase, that liminal threshold between wakefulness and the onset of rapid eye movement sleep, when your brain waves are transitioning and your body's motor inhibition systems are activating to prevent you from physically acting out your dreams. The mechanism behind these vibrations appears to involve a temporary disconnection between your conscious awareness and your physical sensory input, creating a peculiar neurological condition where your mind remains sufficiently alert to perceive the natural paralysis of sleep, while your nervous system is firing in unusual patterns during this transition phase. This phenomenon has persisted throughout human history, documented in various meditation traditions and sleep studies. Yet modern society has largely normalized the experience as merely an unusual sleep phenomenon to be ignored or dismissed rather than explored. Despite the fact that countless individuals have recognized this state as a distinct opportunity for conscious exploration of non-ordinary states of consciousness and the development of intentional lucid awareness during the dream state. Wake-initiated lucid dreaming, or WILD as it is commonly abbreviated in sleep research circles, represents one of the most direct pathways into conscious dreaming by maintaining continuous awareness as your physical body transitions into sleep, while your mind remains alert and observant throughout the entire process. This technique involves deliberately staying conscious during the hypnagogic state, which is that peculiar threshold between wakefulness and sleep, where your body begins to paralyze itself in preparation for REM sleep, while your consciousness theoretically should be fading into unconsciousness. Yet through focused intention and specific mental practices, you can maintain your awareness through this transition and find yourself suddenly lucid within a dream environment that feels remarkably vivid and tangible. The mechanism behind this technique operates on the principle that consciousness does not have to be an all-or-nothing phenomenon, but rather exists on a spectrum where different aspects of your awareness can be active or inactive simultaneously, so that while your body enters sleep paralysis and your sensory perception shifts away from external stimuli toward internal mental imagery, your executive functions and self-awareness can theoretically remain engaged if you direct them with sufficient intention and practice. The psychological foundation of WILD rests upon the understanding that the boundary between sleep and wakefulness is far more permeable than most people experience in their daily lives, and that through specific mental anchoring techniques such as counting, visualization, or body scanning, you can essentially trick your consciousness into following your physical body into sleep while refusing to lose its own sense of continuity and presence, creating a unique state where you are simultaneously asleep and awake in the most literal sense. Imagine yourself lying in bed in a state of complete physical relaxation, your body entirely still and heavy against the mattress, while your mind remains alert and aware in that liminal space between wakefulness and sleep. In this conscious yet drowsy condition, you begin to visualize a thick, sturdy rope hanging directly above you, suspended in the darkness of your mental landscape, and with focused intention, you attempt to reach upward with your astral arms, grasping this imaginary rope as though you were about to pull yourself up and out of your physical body. The technique operates on the principle that by maintaining a thread of conscious attention and creating a deliberate motor intention, even though your physical body remains completely paralyzed by the natural processes of sleep onset, you can essentially trick your consciousness into performing a physical action within the dream space, thereby triggering a separation between your waking awareness and your sleeping body. The psychological mechanism underlying this approach suggests that the mind generates movement commands which your physical form cannot execute due to the atonia of REM sleep. And in this state of attempted yet impossible motion, your consciousness becomes hyper-aware of the disconnect between intention and physical reality, creating the perfect conditions for a lucid dream or astral projection to occur. What proves particularly fascinating is how this technique persists as a legitimate practice within communities dedicated to exploring non-ordinary states of consciousness, despite the fact that it operates entirely within the realm of subjective experience and internal mental imagery. Yet we have largely accepted this as a normal extension of human consciousness exploration, neither dismissing it as impossible nor treating it as unusual. Instead, acknowledging that the boundary between imagination and experienced reality becomes remarkably blurred when the conscious mind engages with the sleeping body in such deliberate and structured ways. Sleep paralysis represents one of the most profound yet misunderstood phenomena that occurs during the transition between wakefulness and sleep, a liminal state where your conscious mind awakens while your body remains locked in the neurological constraints of rapid eye movement sleep. During this REM stage, your brain deliberately paralyzes your voluntary muscles to prevent you from acting out your dreams, a protective mechanism that has served humanity for millennia. Yet when consciousness emerges before this paralysis releases, you find yourself trapped in your own body, unable to move your limbs or speak, though your mind is fully alert and processing the world around you. This experience can last anywhere from a few seconds to several minutes, though subjectively it often feels far longer. And during this window of consciousness trapped within physical immobility, many individuals report experiencing hallucinations, a sense of a presence in the room, pressure on their chest, or the sensation of another entity nearby, phenomena that vary dramatically across cultures and individuals based on expectation and prior knowledge. The psychological mechanism underlying sleep paralysis involves the mismatch between your ascending consciousness and your descending motor control, a neurological lag where your awareness returns to baseline functioning while your body remains in the atonia state, a state so complete that even your diaphragm's voluntary control can feel compromised, creating a sensation of suffocation or pressure that feeds into the already heightened anxiety of the moment. Imagine yourself lying in bed in complete darkness, your body relaxed and heavy against the mattress, your mind hovering in that twilight space between wakefulness and sleep where consciousness still flickers with awareness. In this state, you begin to focus your intention on the sensation of rising, visualizing yourself gently floating upward from your physical form as though an invisible elevator is slowly lifting you away from the bed beneath you. You don't struggle or force this sensation. Instead, you allow it to emerge naturally as you maintain a detached observer's perspective on your own body below, watching as the distance between your consciousness and your physical vessel gradually increases. The technique relies on the peculiar neurological phenomenon that occurs during the hypnagogic state, when your brain's boundary between sensory perception and imagination becomes remarkably porous, allowing visualizations to feel increasingly real and tangible. As you continue focusing on this upward motion, the sensation often intensifies, and many practitioners report experiencing actual physical sensations of levitation, a floating weightlessness, or even the perception of rising through their ceiling and into the space above. What makes this technique psychologically compelling is that it exploits the brain's natural susceptibility to proprioceptive illusions during sleep onset, when the neural systems responsible for body position awareness are becoming less dependent on actual physical feedback and more reliant on internal imagination. Yet despite understanding this mechanism entirely through neuroscience, most people who attempt the lift-out experience a profound sense of wonder and reality in the sensation, finding it extraordinarily difficult to dismiss as mere imagination even when intellectually aware of the mechanism at work. The rolling out method represents one of the most intuitive and physically grounded techniques for achieving lucid dreaming and astral projection, and it begins with a simple observation about the natural human experience of sleep paralysis and the sensations that accompany the transition between wakefulness and dreaming. When you first become aware that you are experiencing sleep paralysis, which occurs when your conscious mind awakens but your body remains locked in the muscular atonia that characterizes the REM stage of sleep, you find yourself in a unique neurological state where your sense of awareness has reconnected with your physical form, yet your motor cortex has not fully reactivated. In this suspended moment, the rolling out method asks you to visualize your consciousness physically rolling sideways out of your body, as though you are lying in bed and gently tumbling off the mattress onto the floor beside it. The technique involves constructing a detailed mental image of this rolling motion, feeling the momentum of your consciousness shifting laterally through space, imagining the texture of air against your astral form as you complete the rotation, and maintaining focus on this visualization with unwavering concentration and calm intention. The mechanism that makes this technique effective operates through the principle of leveraging the brain's natural tendency to accept coherent narratives and sustained imaginative focus as directives for experience construction, essentially convincing your consciousness that movement is occurring even while your physical body remains completely immobilized, which paradoxically becomes the catalyst for a shift in consciousness itself. Imagine yourself lying in bed in the darkness, your body completely still and relaxed, when suddenly you become aware of a peculiar sensation beginning at the crown of your head, a tingling vibration that seems to originate from somewhere deep within your consciousness rather than from your physical form. This sensation gradually intensifies and spreads downward through your entire body, creating a feeling of weightlessness that becomes increasingly pronounced as you maintain your awareness and remain perfectly calm. Your bedroom begins to feel less solid, less constraining, and as you mentally direct your attention upward with gentle intention, you notice that your sense of self, your awareness, your consciousness seems to be rising above the surface of the bed itself. The physical sensations of the mattress beneath you fade into irrelevance as your perception shifts, and you experience what feels unmistakably like a slow, gentle ascent, as though you are being lifted by an invisible force or as though you yourself have become lighter than air. The mechanism underlying this experience involves the dissolution of the boundary between your body awareness and your sense of self in the liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, where your brain's spatial processing centers become increasingly suggestible to the power of focused intention and imagination. As your rational mind's control over perception weakens during this transitional state, your consciousness becomes freed to interpret sensory information in novel ways, and the internal vibrations caused by the hypnagogic state can be recontextualized by your mind as movement through space, rather than neurological phenomena occurring within a stationary body. Consider the moment when you find yourself standing before a solid barrier in your dream, a wall constructed of brick or stone or some other impenetrable material, and yet you feel a curious absence of concern about this obstacle that would normally demand you find a doorway or window to proceed. In waking life, walls represent absolute boundaries, physical constraints that our bodies cannot traverse without injury or property damage, yet in the dream state, we encounter them differently as suggestions rather than laws. The technique of passing through walls involves approaching this barrier with intention and expectation, moving toward it with the quiet confidence that your dream body possesses properties entirely different from your waking body, that matter itself becomes negotiable in this realm where consciousness operates without the restrictions of physics. As you walk toward the wall, you maintain your focus and deliberately imagine your hands extending through its surface, perceiving the wall not as a solid obstacle but as a permeable membrane, a threshold that yields to your will and expectation rather than resisting it. The psychological mechanism underlying this experience relates to how our minds construct reality based on belief systems and expectation. Our waking brains have been conditioned through repeated experience to accept walls as immovable objects, yet this conditioning dissolves in dreams where the subconscious mind recognizes its own power to generate all sensory experience. What makes this technique particularly striking is how quickly we abandon it upon waking, how readily we return to accepting walls as absolute barriers despite having directly experienced their permeability moments before, suggesting that our consensus agreement about physical reality functions more as collective assumption than verifiable truth. A normalized habit of perception so deeply embedded that we rarely question whether the wall's solidity exists in the wall itself or primarily in our conditioned expectation of what walls should be. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast cliff overlooking an endless landscape of clouds and sky, feeling the wind currents moving across your skin with perfect clarity. And as you lean forward into that open air, your body begins to lift effortlessly upward, your arms extending naturally as though they have become wings themselves, and you rise higher and higher until the ground below becomes nothing more than a distant memory. This sensation of flight represents one of the most profound and recurring experiences in the human dream state, where the normal constraints of gravity and physics simply dissolve into irrelevance. The mechanism behind this phenomenon operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Physiologically, during REM sleep when most vivid dreaming occurs, your brain essentially paralyzes your body to prevent you from acting out your dreams, yet simultaneously creates an elaborate illusion of movement and spatial navigation that feels absolutely convincing in every detail. Psychologically, flight functions as a profound metaphor for liberation and transcendence, tapping into deep archetypal associations between ascending movement and freedom from earthly constraints, which explains why so many lucid dreamers naturally gravitate toward this particular experience once they gain conscious control within the dream space. The peculiar aspect of this phenomenon is how normalized it has become despite its inherent impossibility in waking reality. We have collectively accepted that our sleeping minds will regularly generate experiences of weightlessness and aerial movement that our conscious minds know to be physically impossible, yet we rarely question why this particular fantasy persists so universally across cultures and throughout human history. When you practice flying deliberately within a lucid dream through intentional visualization and expectation setting before sleep, you are essentially training your mind to recognize and stabilize this natural dream state, channeling the brain's own capacity for generating convincing sensory experiences into a directed and controllable form of internal exploration. As you lie in your bed at night, begin to imagine that your body is becoming progressively heavier, as though gravity itself is intensifying around you and pulling you downward with increasing force. Picture the mattress beneath you gradually softening, becoming less like a solid surface and more like a viscous, yielding substance that yields to the weight of your physical form. Visualize how your body begins to sink slowly into this surface, first your shoulders pressing deeper into the fabric, then your torso following, as though you are descending into warm water or a cloud of soft material that parts to accommodate your descent. As this imagined sinking continues, you might feel a peculiar sensation of heaviness combined with a strange lightness, a paradoxical feeling where your body seems both incredibly dense and somehow floating simultaneously. The bed becomes less of a barrier between you and the world below, and instead transforms into a permeable membrane through which you can pass, much like moving through layers of atmosphere or water rather than encountering solid resistance. This technique works because our minds readily accept the premise of gradual physical transitions when presented with consistent imagery, and the brain interprets these sustained mental images as approaching states of sleep, where the boundary between waking sensation and dream sensation begins to dissolve. We have all experienced the curious heaviness that comes just before sleep, that moment where our limbs feel weighted and distant, and this technique simply amplifies and directs that natural phenomenon toward a specific imaginative outcome. Despite knowing intellectually that our beds remain solid and that we cannot actually sink through them, something in our consciousness accepts the metaphorical reality of this sinking sensation, allowing it to carry us deeper into states where lucid awareness becomes possible, where the normal constraints of physics yield to the extraordinary logic of dreams. As you find yourself becoming aware within the dream space, you may notice that the environment around you begins to feel unstable, wavering, or as though it might dissolve entirely back into unconsciousness. And in these moments of fragility, the technique of spinning can serve as an extraordinary anchor to your lucid state. When you sense this instability beginning to take hold, rather than resisting it or attempting to grip harder onto the dream narrative, you instead deliberately begin to spin your dream body in a slow, controlled rotation, much like a figure skater beginning their descent into a gentle pirouette, allowing your awareness to track the motion of the environment rotating around you as you turn. The mechanism underlying this technique operates on several profound levels within the structure of consciousness itself, as the deliberate generation of vestibular stimulation through rotational movement activates the inner ear systems and balance centers of the brain, which in turn sends cascading signals throughout the neural pathways responsible for maintaining coherence and spatial awareness, effectively grounding your consciousness more firmly within the dream construct. By focusing your attention on the physical sensation of spinning, you redirect your mental resources away from the areas that were beginning to destabilize the dream, instead channeling your awareness into a singular, kinesthetic anchor point that proves remarkably resistant to the fragmenting forces that typically dissolve lucid dreams at their most vulnerable moments. During your waking hours, you might notice that you occasionally pinch your nose shut while breathing, perhaps when you encounter an unpleasant smell or when you're about to dive underwater. And this simple mechanical action of closing off your nasal passages creates an immediate and undeniable change in your sensory experience. The nose pinch technique for lucid dreaming operates on the principle that within a dream state, when you attempt this same action of pinching your nostrils closed and trying to breathe through them, something remarkable occurs because in the dream world, the normal rules of physics and biology do not apply, and you will find that you can still draw breath through your pinched nose as if the obstruction does not exist at all. This contradiction between expectation and reality serves as a powerful reality check, a moment of cognitive dissonance that jolts your sleeping mind into awareness, because your brain recognizes that this outcome violates everything you know about how air passage and respiration should function. The mechanism behind this technique rests on the establishment of a habit during your waking life, a routine practice where you regularly pinch your nose and attempt to breathe, and then consciously note whether the breath comes through or not, training yourself to perform this check automatically even while sleeping. Over time, through consistent repetition during your waking hours, this nose pinch becomes such an ingrained behavior that it transfers into your dream state, where your dreaming consciousness will eventually perform the same action out of pure habit. And when it does, the impossible sensation of breathing through a pinched nose will awaken your awareness to the dream nature of your experience. Throughout your waking life, you move through the world with an implicit assumption that you are awake, that the environment surrounding you follows consistent physical laws, and that your perceptions accurately reflect an objective reality that exists independent of your observation. This assumption is so fundamental to human consciousness that it rarely surfaces into explicit awareness, yet it operates as the invisible foundation upon which all your decisions and actions rest. A reality check is a deliberate interruption of this automatic acceptance, a practiced method of questioning the nature of your current state by performing specific tests that will yield dramatically different results depending on whether you are awake or dreaming. The most common reality check involves attempting to push one finger through the palm of your opposite hand with moderate pressure, observing that in waking life your finger encounters solid resistance, while in dreams the finger frequently passes through or deforms the skin unnaturally. Other practitioners press their nose and mouth closed while attempting to breathe, finding that in dreams air somehow flows despite the apparent blockage, or they look at text or digital displays multiple times, noting that in dreams these elements typically shift and blur in ways that defy the stability of written language in waking consciousness. The psychological mechanism underlying the effectiveness of reality checks operates through a principle called habit formation and state-dependent memory. When you perform the same questioning behavior hundreds of times throughout your waking day, this habit becomes so deeply encoded in your behavioral patterns that it naturally carries over into your dream state, where it continues to execute even as your rational faculties are offline. The crucial difference is that dreams do not maintain physical consistency or respond to expectations about material properties, so when your dream self performs these tests, the results will contradict what you have learned about waking physics. The wake back to bed technique, also known as the wake back to sleep method, involves deliberately waking yourself during the night and then immediately returning to bed with the specific intention of entering a lucid dream or initiating an out-of-body experience from a state of heightened awareness. The process typically begins in the evening when you set a firm intention to wake after approximately 4 to 6 hours of sleep, which is when your brain naturally cycles into deeper stages of REM sleep, where vivid dreams and lucid dreaming are most likely to occur. You might use an alarm clock set to a specific time, or you might rely on your own internal awareness and body's natural sleep rhythms to wake you at the designated moment. When you do wake, the key is to remain conscious and aware rather than simply drifting back into ordinary sleep, which requires maintaining a delicate balance between relaxation and alertness that many practitioners find remarkably difficult to achieve. The psychological mechanism underlying this technique is rooted in the fundamental relationship between consciousness and sleep, wherein the brief period of wakefulness creates a conscious bridge between your waking mind and your dreaming mind. When you wake in the middle of the night, your consciousness is fully activated and your critical thinking faculties are engaged, yet your body remains in a state of partial sleep paralysis and your brain chemistry still resembles that of the dreaming state. This unique combination creates an optimal window for lucid awareness, because you are bringing the clarity and intention of your waking mind directly into the neural conditions associated with vivid dreaming. As you then relax back into sleep while maintaining this conscious awareness, your brain essentially skips over the normal progression into unconscious dreaming and instead enters what is sometimes called a hypnagogic state, where the boundaries between waking consciousness and dream consciousness become permeable and fluid. As you lie in bed in the moments just before sleep fully overtakes your conscious mind, you may begin to notice peculiar visual phenomena unfolding behind your closed eyelids. Fragmented scenes and abstract patterns that seem to emerge from nowhere, swirling and shifting without any conscious direction from you. Shapes that morph and transform with a logic all their own, creating what researchers and experienced meditators refer to as hypnagogic imagery. The spontaneous visual hallucinations that arise during the transitional state between wakefulness and sleep. These images might appear as geometric patterns, faces, landscapes, or abstract colors that flow and dissolve into one another, and rather than fighting against them or dismissing them, this technique invites you to observe them with gentle curiosity, to become an aware witness to this natural neurological process unfolding within your own mind. The mechanism underlying hypnagogic imagery involves the gradual shift in brain wave activity as you descend through the stages of sleep, particularly as your brain transitions from the filtering mechanisms of wakefulness into the more permissive state of early sleep, where the visual cortex begins to activate more freely while the critical faculties of your rational mind begin to relax their grip on sensory processing. During wakefulness, your brain actively suppresses or filters random neural activations to maintain a coherent perception of reality. But as you approach sleep, this filtering process weakens, allowing spontaneous activation patterns in visual processing areas to become consciously perceptible, creating these dreamlike visions that seem to arrive from external sources even though they originate entirely within your own neural activity. Within the dream state, one of the most compelling exercises involves the deliberate summoning of objects through focused intention and visualization, a practice wherein the dreamer cultivates the ability to manifest specific items into their dreamscape simply by concentrating upon them with unwavering mental clarity. In the waking world, we understand that objects exist independently of our thoughts, occupying fixed positions in physical space, and that calling for something requires either movement toward it or the assistance of another person to retrieve it for us. Yet within the dream environment, the rules governing manifestation shift dramatically because the entire landscape exists as a projection of consciousness itself. When you commit to the practice of summoning objects within lucid dreams, you begin by selecting a simple item to materialize, perhaps something as straightforward as an apple or a book or a key, and you hold this image in your mind's eye with absolute conviction while maintaining your lucid awareness, allowing the object to appear before you through nothing more than the force of your concentrated intention. The psychological mechanism underlying this phenomenon operates on the principle that within dreams, the subconscious mind responds directly to focused attention and expectation, creating sensory experiences that feel entirely real even though they emerge from neural activity rather than external stimuli. And the more emotionally charged your intention and the more vivid your mental imagery, the more readily and convincingly the object materializes within your dreamscape. Consider the peculiar experience of waiting in an airport terminal for a flight that has been delayed, where each minute stretches into what feels like an eternity, and you find yourself checking the departure board repeatedly, watching the hands of the clock move with agonizing slowness, while simultaneously recalling how quickly your morning passed as you rushed through your routine without conscious attention to its progression. This phenomenon represents one of the most fundamental distortions of temporal perception that humans experience in waking life, and it reveals something profound about the malleable nature of how we experience duration and the passage of time itself. The mechanism underlying this experience emerges from the relationship between attention and consciousness, wherein focused awareness on the passage of time actually amplifies our perception of its slowness, as the brain timestamps each moment with greater precision and creates more memory markers, resulting in a subjectively longer experience, while conversely, when attention is distributed across engaging activities or when we are absorbed in something demanding, fewer distinct temporal markers are created, causing that period to feel compressed in retrospect. What proves most remarkable about time dilation is how deeply normalized this experience has become despite its fundamental disconnect from objective reality, as we have all unconsciously accepted that time genuinely moves differently depending on our psychological state. Yet when examined rationally, the passage of time remains constant and measurable by external instruments that do not care whether we are bored or engaged. As you settle into the darkness of your bedroom and prepare yourself for sleep, begin to direct your conscious attention toward a single point located in the center of your forehead, approximately 1 inch above the space between your eyebrows, where many contemplative traditions suggest the third eye resides as a seat of inner vision and spiritual perception. This technique involves maintaining a gentle, unwavering focus on this region of your consciousness, while you remain physically still and mentally alert, allowing your awareness to concentrate entirely on the sensation and imagery that may arise from this focal point as your body begins its transition toward sleep. The third eye focus method operates on the principle that consciousness itself is not merely a product of random neural activity, but rather a directed force that can be concentrated and aimed like a beam of light through intentional practice and sustained attention. When you focus your mind persistently on this central point, you begin to alter the normal patterns of your thinking, disrupting the usual cascade of random thoughts and distractions that typically dominate the hypnagogic state between wakefulness and dreaming. This concentrated attention creates a kind of mental gateway, a threshold point where your conscious mind remains engaged and aware even as your body descends into the physiological stages of sleep, thereby maintaining the delicate balance required for lucid dreaming and astral projection experiences. The third eye focus technique has persisted across countless cultures and centuries of human history, from ancient Egyptian mystery schools to Tibetan Buddhist meditation practices to modern Western occult traditions, suggesting that despite our contemporary scientific understanding of neurology and brain function, we have collectively recognized and validated the remarkable power of this simple yet profound practice. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a cliff or a tall building in your dream, and as you become lucid and aware of your dreaming state, you make the deliberate choice to jump off into the void below. This technique operates on the principle that your fear of falling and the anticipatory anxiety surrounding the jump creates such a powerful emotional and physiological response that it serves as a catalyst for deeper consciousness and altered states of awareness. As you leap from that precipice in your dream, the sensation of falling triggers an intense cascade of neural activity throughout your brain, activating multiple regions simultaneously in ways that ordinary dream consciousness rarely achieves. The mechanism behind this approach rests on the understanding that extreme emotional stimuli and physical sensations within dreams can destabilize your normal dream narrative and propel your awareness into what practitioners describe as the hypnagogic state, or the threshold between sleeping and waking consciousness. When you surrender to the fall rather than resisting it, when you allow yourself to experience the weightlessness and velocity without trying to control or fight against it, your mind undergoes a profound shift in its processing patterns and perceptual frameworks. The paradox that makes this technique persistently effective despite its apparent recklessness is that we have internalized a deep cultural narrative about the danger of falling, yet we simultaneously know with absolute certainty that we cannot be physically harmed by falling in a dream, and this cognitive dissonance between our ancestral fear responses and our rational understanding creates a unique psychological environment where transformation becomes possible. Over countless generations, our brains have been hardwired to recognize falling as an existential threat, and yet modern dreamers continue to use this ancient survival mechanism as a gateway to transcendent experiences, revealing how our primal responses remain just as powerful and just as capable of profound transformation as they were in our evolutionary past. Imagine yourself in a situation where you have committed to something, perhaps a social engagement or a professional obligation, but as the moment approaches, you begin to experience a growing sense of reluctance or doubt that gradually intensifies into a compelling urge to withdraw from the commitment entirely. The backing out technique leverages this very human tendency by having you consciously practice the act of reversing a decision or retreating from a planned course of action, which paradoxically can serve as a powerful gateway into the liminal spaces between wakefulness and sleep, where lucid dreaming and astral projection become possible. As you lie in bed preparing for sleep, You mentally construct a scenario where you had intended to go somewhere or do something, and then you deliberately walk yourself backward through the sequence of events that would be required to undo that commitment, retracing your steps both physically in your imagination and emotionally through the various justifications you might use. This reversal process engages a distinct neural pathway that differs significantly from forward thinking or goal-oriented visualization, creating a unique disorientation that can fragment your normal sleep onset process. The psychological mechanism underlying this technique operates on the principle that the human brain processes reversal and contradiction differently than linear progression, particularly when these reversals are applied to commitments and decisions that carry emotional weight. When you actively practice backing out of scenarios, you engage executive function regions alongside emotional processing centers, creating a state of cognitive tension that prevents the habitual sleep patterns from establishing themselves as usual. This mental state of systematically undoing things triggers what researchers recognize as a form of thought inversion, where your consciousness experiences the world in reverse sequence, and this inverted processing can serve as a powerful disorientation mechanism that destabilizes ordinary waking consciousness. Imagine yourself standing in a pristine lobby of an elegant building, where the soft hum of ambient lighting fills the space around you and the polished floors reflect the gentle glow of carefully positioned fixtures that seem to emanate a warm, welcoming quality. Before you stands a set of gleaming elevator doors, perhaps made of brushed steel or mirrored glass, and as you approach them with a calm and unhurried pace, you notice how they respond to your presence by sliding open with a smooth whisper of mechanical precision. You step inside this enclosed space, feeling the gentle transition from the lobby into the confined chamber, and as the doors close behind you with a soft chime, you become acutely aware of your own weight, your own presence within this suspended environment. The elevator begins its descent or ascent, and with each floor that passes, you feel yourself becoming lighter, more buoyant, as though the very act of moving through vertical space is loosening the bonds that tether your consciousness to your physical form. This technique works because the human mind has evolved to interpret elevation and descent as fundamental transitions between states of consciousness, drawing from our instinctive understanding that moving downward can represent journeying inward toward deeper layers of awareness, while the confined space of an elevator creates a natural boundary that separates the waking world from the realm of dreams and astral experience. The gentle motion, the subtle mechanical sounds, and the visual progression of ascending or descending through floors all combine to create a powerful psychological anchor that guides your awareness toward the liminal space between wakefulness and sleep. Imagine yourself standing before a tall wooden ladder that extends upward into an indefinite space, its rungs evenly spaced and weathered from countless ascents. And as you place your hands upon the smooth wood and lift your foot to the first rung, you feel the subtle resistance of gravity pulling at your limbs while the ladder sways almost imperceptibly beneath your weight. The sensation is grounded and tactile, each rung solid beneath your palms and soles, and as you begin to climb higher, rung after rung, you become acutely aware of the growing distance between yourself and the ground below. Yet paradoxically, this awareness does not frighten you, but instead focuses your entire consciousness into the present moment of ascending. The ladder becomes a metaphor for progression and ascent, for the incremental steps we take toward higher states of consciousness and understanding. And psychologically, this climbing motion engages a primal part of our brain that associates upward movement with enlightenment, transcendence, and spiritual elevation, concepts that have persisted across virtually every human culture and religious tradition throughout history. The repetitive rhythm of climbing, the synchronization between breath and movement, the gentle oscillation of the ladder beneath you, all conspire to create a meditative state where the boundary between physical effort and mental clarity begins to blur and dissolve. What makes this technique particularly effective is that it bypasses our analytical mind by engaging the body directly, creating a somatic experience that feels simultaneously challenging and achievable, grounded in a logic that requires no explanation or justification. The latter has become so deeply embedded in our collective unconscious as a symbol of ascension that we need not understand why climbing feels transcendent. We simply accept that upward movement corresponds to upward consciousness, and in accepting this, we allow our minds to release their grip on mundane reality and drift naturally toward the liminal spaces where dreams and wakefulness merge into one unified field of perception and possibility. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast body of water, perhaps an ocean or an infinitely large lake, with the surface stretching endlessly toward the horizon in every direction. The water is calm and inviting, a gentle blue-green color that seems to glow with an inner luminescence, and you feel an irresistible pull to enter it. As you wade in slowly, the water rises from your ankles to your knees to your waist, each layer of submersion feeling lighter and more liberating than the last. You continue moving deeper, swimming outward with steady, rhythmic strokes, feeling the water support your body with perfect buoyancy as you move farther from the shore. The sensation is one of complete weightlessness and freedom, as though the water itself is cradling you and carrying you gently deeper into the unknown. The shore behind you gradually recedes into the distance, becoming smaller and smaller until it is merely a thin line on the horizon, and yet you feel no fear, only a profound sense of peace and expansion. The mechanism at work in this technique operates through the principle of progressive detachment and the dissolution of physical boundaries that characterize the transition from wakefulness to sleep. Water has long served as a powerful symbol and sensory anchor in the human mind, representing fluidity, surrender, and the boundary between conscious and unconscious states. As you mentally rehearse the experience of swimming outward, your brain begins to interpret the physical sensation of weightlessness and the psychological experience of moving away from the familiar as metaphors for the release of conscious control. The rhythm of swimming provides a repetitive motor pattern that naturally lulls the mind toward sleep, while simultaneously maintaining just enough cognitive engagement to sustain lucid awareness. The water's constant support and the visual imagery of receding shorelines work together to reinforce the sense that you are voluntarily releasing your attachment to ordinary reality, making the transition into the dream state feel like a natural continuation rather than an abrupt shift. As you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself in a lucid dream where you become aware of the dream characters surrounding you and you begin to engage them in meaningful conversation, asking them direct questions about the nature of your dream state and your subconscious mind. In this waking dream scenario, you might approach a figure and ask them directly whether they are real or simply a projection of your own consciousness, or you might inquire what they represent within your psychological landscape. The mechanism at work here involves the recognition that every character, every voice, and every response you encounter in a dream originates from within your own mind, from the vast neural networks that continue processing information even as your conscious awareness recedes. When you speak to a dream character and they respond, you are essentially having a conversation with different aspects of yourself, with fragmented neural patterns that have taken on autonomous forms within the dream space. This technique works because it creates a feedback loop of self-awareness. By questioning the nature of these characters and their origins, you strengthen the metacognitive processes that distinguish between dreaming and waking consciousness. The psychological principle underlying this method is that lucid dreaming becomes more stable and more frequent when you actively engage with the dream environment rather than passively observing it. And dialogue represents perhaps the most interactive form of engagement available to you. What makes this approach particularly effective is that dream characters often respond in unexpected ways, revealing information or perspectives that your conscious mind had not articulated, suggesting that the dialogue itself becomes a bridge between conscious intention and subconscious knowledge. As you practice this technique night after night, your dreams become increasingly responsive to your questioning, and the boundary between observer and observed gradually dissolves into a unified field of conscious dreaming experience. As you lie in bed with your eyes closed, begin to visualize a specific location in vivid detail, perhaps a familiar room in your home or a cherished place from your past, and hold this mental image steady in your mind's eye for several moments, allowing yourself to become fully immersed in the sensory experience of being present within this space. Once you have established this scene with clarity and emotional resonance, deliberately shift your focus to an entirely different location, perhaps a beach you have visited, a forest you remember, or even a fantastical realm that exists only in imagination, and make this transition as smooth and intentional as possible, noticing how your mind transitions between these distinct environments. The psychological mechanism underlying this technique operates on the principle that our consciousness is fundamentally fluid and capable of navigating multiple mental spaces without the constraints of physical movement. And by practicing deliberate scene transitions, while in a receptive state between wakefulness and sleep, you train your mind to recognize that the boundaries between different mental states are far more permeable than we typically assume. The act of consciously shifting scenes requires you to maintain a delicate balance between focus and surrender, between the analytical mind that recognizes you are directing the visualization and the intuitive mind that allows the imagery to flow naturally without excessive control or effort. What persists in this practice, despite the apparent simplicity of moving one's attention from one imagined space to another, is the profound realization that consciousness itself appears to operate independently of physical location, suggesting that our sense of being bound to a single perspective at any given moment may be more of a habitual construction than an absolute necessity, and through repeated scene-changing exercises, you begin to dissolve the rigid boundaries between what feels real and what feels imagined, allowing yourself to drift into the liminal spaces where lucid dreaming and astral projection naturally arise. Mnemonic dream induction is a technique that relies on the power of intentional repetition and cognitive reinforcement to increase the likelihood of becoming lucid within your dreams, and it begins long before you ever close your eyes for the night. Throughout your waking day, you engage in a practice of repeatedly affirming to yourself a simple phrase or intention, such as, "I will recognize that I am dreaming," or "I will become lucid in my dreams tonight." And you pair this verbal repetition with genuine visualization of yourself becoming aware within a dream state, imagining the specific sensations and clarity that accompany lucid awareness. The mechanism behind this approach operates through the principle that your brain's default mode network and metacognitive systems become primed through consistent reinforcement of the intention to achieve lucidity, essentially training your mind to prioritize the recognition of dream states by making this goal a dominant pattern in your consciousness throughout the day. When you engage in this mnemonic practice repeatedly, you are essentially creating strong neural pathways associated with dream awareness and the desire to recognize dreams, and these pathways become activated more readily during your sleep cycle because your brain continues processing the patterns and priorities you established during wakefulness. What is particularly interesting about this technique is how it manages to bridge the apparent divide between waking and sleeping consciousness, allowing the explicit intentions you hold while awake to somehow penetrate the typically unaware state of dreaming. And yet, despite the clear logical foundation of this approach, many people remain skeptical of its effectiveness. Perhaps because we have normalized the idea that waking intention and sleeping consciousness operate in completely separate domains with no real communication between them. Consider the moment when you wake from sleep, still half submerged in the fading residue of your dreams, that peculiar state where the nocturnal imagery begins to dissolve like watercolor in rain, and you instinctively reach for a notebook or your phone to capture whatever fragments remain before they vanish entirely into the unconscious depths from which they came. This simple act of recording your dreams immediately upon waking represents one of the most foundational practices for developing lucid dreaming awareness and strengthening your connection to the dream world itself. The mechanism underlying this technique operates on several interrelated neurological and psychological principles. When you deliberately attend to your dreams and commit them to written language, you signal to your brain that these nocturnal experiences possess genuine value and importance, thereby strengthening the neural pathways that encode dream memory and dream recall. Dreams are naturally ephemeral experiences, existing in a brain state that prioritizes emotional and imaginative processing over the logical, sequential thinking required for memory consolidation, and the act of writing creates a bridge between these two states, translating the ephemeral into the concrete. Furthermore, the practice of reviewing your written dream entries gradually reveals recurring patterns, themes, symbols, and emotional landscapes that become increasingly recognizable when they reappear during future dreams. And this recognition is precisely what triggers the moment of lucidity when you realize within the dream that you are dreaming. The remarkable consistency with which people report abandoning dream journaling practices, despite understanding their effectiveness, speaks to how normalized the forgetting of dreams has become in modern consciousness. We have collectively accepted the dissolution of nocturnal memories as an inevitable feature of sleep, rather than recognizing it as a learned pattern that can be fundamentally rewired through intentional practice and sustained attention to the dream realm. Imagine lying in bed with your eyes closed, your body beginning to relax into the mattress as the world around you grows quieter and darker with each passing moment. You begin to focus your attention on your hands, perhaps resting them on your chest or at your sides, and you initiate a deliberate counting sequence using only your fingers as your focal point. Starting with your thumb, you mentally count as you curl each finger inward one at a time, progressing slowly through all 10 fingers, then beginning the sequence again from the beginning. The rhythm becomes meditative and hypnotic, a gentle cycling of attention that provides an anchor point for your consciousness as the boundary between wakefulness and sleep begins to blur and soften. This simple yet profound technique leverages the mind's natural tendency to follow patterns and repetition, creating a state of focused awareness that paradoxically facilitates the transition into lucid dreaming by maintaining just enough conscious attention while allowing the body to drift into sleep. The mechanism operates on the principle that motor imagery and kinesthetic visualization activate specific neural pathways that can be maintained across the sleep threshold, essentially keeping a thread of awareness alive even as your physical body enters a paralyzed sleep state. By concentrating on the sensation of each finger moving and the numerical progression accompanying each movement, you establish a feedback loop between consciousness and sensation that resists the typical dissolution of awareness that normally occurs at sleep onset. What makes this technique particularly effective is that it engages multiple sensory and cognitive systems simultaneously without requiring external stimuli or complex visualization, allowing it to persist naturally as sleep approaches when more demanding mental techniques would inevitably fade. The palm push check is a reality testing technique that involves pressing your palm against a solid surface, such as a wall, a table, or your own leg, and observing what happens when you apply gentle to moderate pressure. In waking life, when you push your palm against any solid object, your hand will naturally compress and deform slightly at the point of contact, and the object itself will remain completely immobile and resistant to your pressure, providing immediate tactile feedback that confirms the density and solidity of the material before you. This physical interaction has remained consistent throughout your entire waking existence, occurring precisely the same way thousands upon thousands of times across your lifetime, creating an expectation so deeply embedded in your consciousness that you no longer consciously register the sensation or mentally process the outcome of this simple action. However, within the dream state, when you perform this exact same palm push check with the same intentional pressure and focus, the laws of physics that govern waking reality begin to behave unpredictably and inconsistently. Your hand may pass partially or completely through the surface, as though it were made of vapor or smoke, or the surface itself may feel spongy and yielding like foam or rubber, or your palm might sink slowly into the material as though pushing into sand or thick liquid, producing sensations that should logically be impossible given the apparent solidity of the object before you in the dream. The mechanism behind why this reality check proves so effective lies in the fact that your dreaming mind typically accepts dream physics without question, never pausing to compare the feedback it receives to the baseline of waking reality. Yet when you deliberately perform this intentional action with conscious awareness and expectation, you create a momentary pause in which the cognitive dissonance between expected and actual sensation becomes impossible to ignore. Consider the experience of reading a passage from a book or article, only to realize moments later that your eyes have moved across the words while your mind remained entirely elsewhere, trapped in thought loops or fragmentary associations that bear no relation to the actual content before you. You find yourself at the bottom of a paragraph with no comprehension of its meaning, and so you read it again, this time with deliberate intention, your consciousness now anchored to the symbols on the page. This phenomenon of reading text twice occurs because the brain is naturally compartmentalized, with visual processing operating on one level while conscious attention operates on another, and these two systems do not always synchronize, particularly when you are tired, stressed, or in that twilight state between wakefulness and sleep. The psychological mechanism at work involves what neuroscientists call automatic processing, where your visual system continues its mechanical function of parsing words and letters, while your prefrontal cortex, responsible for working memory and focus, has drifted toward internal stimuli that feel more compelling in the moment. When you read text twice, the second reading acts as a reset button for attention, forcing your conscious awareness back into alignment with your visual intake, creating a moment of genuine comprehension where before there was only the hollow performance of reading. Yet what makes this technique particularly valuable for inducing lucid dreaming and astral projection is that the repetitive action of reading the same passage twice creates a peculiar cognitive pattern that your mind carries forward into sleep, a kind of recursive loop that eventually becomes portable into the dream state itself. As you practice reading text twice, night after night, the habit becomes so normalized that your sleeping mind begins to replicate this doubling mechanism, causing you to read dream text twice within your dreams, and this act of rereading within the dream becomes your trigger for recognizing the illogical nature of dream communication, thereby sparking lucid awareness within the dream itself. Mirror gazing is a practice in which you position yourself comfortably before a mirror in a dimly lit room, typically lit by a single candle or soft ambient light, and maintain a steady, unfocused gaze at your own reflection for an extended period, anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, allowing your eyes to soften and your conscious mind to drift into a state of receptivity while you observe the subtle shifts and changes that seem to occur within the mirrored image before you. As you continue this practice, practitioners report experiencing profound alterations to their facial features, where the reflection appears to shift and transform, sometimes becoming unfamiliar or taking on characteristics that seem disconnected from your actual appearance, and this sensory phenomenon is often interpreted as a gateway state between waking consciousness and the deeper layers of the dreaming mind. The mechanism behind mirror gazing operates through several interconnected psychological and physiological processes that work together to create this distinctive altered state experience. When you maintain an unfocused, soft gaze for extended periods, your eyes enter a state that neuroscientists describe as reduced accommodation, where the lens of the eye becomes less responsive to focusing demands, and this creates a visual input that is slightly ambiguous and unstable rather than crisp and defined. Simultaneously, your retinas begin to adapt to the continuous visual stimulus of the reflection, causing a phenomenon called sensory adaptation, where neurons that normally fire in response to stable visual information gradually reduce their response rate, and this creates microfluctuations in what you perceive. Your brain, confronted with this ambiguous and fluctuating sensory input, begins to fill in gaps using its predictive modeling systems, essentially generating imagery based on your expectations, memories, and the deeper imagery sources available in your unconscious mind. Consider the moment when you reach for a light switch in your home, perhaps in a hallway or bathroom, and you flip it up and down several times in rapid succession, observing whether the light responds to your commands with its predictable illumination or darkness. In waking life, this action produces an immediate and consistent result every single time you perform it, a mechanical certainty so absolute that you have never once questioned whether the switch will actually work as intended. Your brain has encoded this cause and effect relationship so deeply into your neural pathways that the connection between the physical act of flipping and the resulting change in electrical current feels less like a series of events and more like a singular unified action, almost like an extension of your will itself. The light responds because it must, because the laws of electricity and circuitry demand it, because you have witnessed this phenomenon thousands upon thousands of times throughout your entire life without exception or variation. Yet in the dream state, this certainty becomes your most powerful tool for recognition and awakening. When you dream, the light switch becomes an instrument of instability and confusion, a device that refuses to obey its fundamental nature with any consistency whatsoever. You may flip the switch and see the light brighten, then dim, then brighten again in ways that defy electrical logic, or you may press it and find that nothing happens at all despite your repeated attempts, or you may observe the light cycling through colors and intensities that no conventional bulb could ever produce. The psychological mechanism underlying this phenomenon relates to how your dreaming mind constructs and maintains the rules of reality within your nocturnal narratives, operating with less rigid constraints than the waking world, less committed to physical law and logical consistency. Throughout your waking life, you have developed an automatic habit of glancing at clocks whenever uncertainty about time emerges, whether you are waiting for an appointment, concerned about being late, or simply curious about how many hours remain before an important event. This behavior becomes so ingrained that you perform it almost unconsciously, reaching for your phone to check the digital display or turning your head toward a wall clock without deliberate thought, driven by an implicit need to ground yourself in temporal reality and confirm your position within the day's structure. As you lie in bed during the transition towards sleep, this same impulse persists within your consciousness, and you may find yourself mentally checking imaginary clocks or wondering what time it actually is, even though this information becomes increasingly irrelevant the closer you drift toward the dream state. The psychological mechanism underlying this behavior stems from our fundamental human need for temporal orientation and control, the deep-seated requirement to know where we stand in relation to external schedules and obligations that structure our waking existence. By checking the time, we attempt to assert dominion over an element of reality that often feels beyond our command, creating a false sense of certainty and preparedness. However, within the context of lucid dreaming and astral projection, this habitual clock checking takes on profound significance as a reality testing tool, because in dreams and projected states, time becomes fluid and malleable, clocks display impossible information, numbers shift and transform before your eyes, and the very act of reading a clock face becomes an exercise in perceptual breakdown. By cultivating an intentional habit of clock checking throughout your waking day, making it a deliberate and conscious practice rather than an automatic response, you can train your dreaming mind to perform the same action while asleep. Throughout your waking life, your hands remain one of the most consistently visible and accessible parts of your body, always present in your peripheral vision and immediate awareness. Yet despite this constant proximity, most people rarely take a moment to truly examine their hands with genuine curiosity and sustained attention. The hand examination technique leverages this familiar disconnect by encouraging you to develop a deliberate habit of pausing during your day to study your hands in meticulous detail, observing the intricate patterns of your veins beneath the skin, the unique landscape of lines and creases across your palms, the texture and color variations, and the precise mechanics of how your fingers move when you consciously direct their motion. This waking practice creates a neural pathway and a behavioral anchor that eventually transfers into your dream state, because the brain constructs dream experiences from the same memory banks and habitual attention patterns that govern your waking consciousness. When you perform this hand examination technique repeatedly during your day, you begin training your mind to recognize hands as worthy of focused investigation rather than mere tools to be used unconsciously. And this shift in awareness gradually permeates your sleeping mind as well. The psychological mechanism underlying this technique rests on the principle that whatever captures your deliberate attention during waking hours becomes increasingly likely to capture your attention during dreams, since your dreaming mind continues to process and replay the patterns of awareness you've cultivated while awake. What makes hand examination particularly effective for inducing lucidity is that dreams often distort or obscure the details of hands and fingers in strange ways, rendering them blurry, morphing unpredictably, or appearing with wrong numbers of digits. And when you bring heightened awareness to your hands through daytime practice, you become more likely to notice these peculiar distortions when they occur in dreams. Dream signs represent recurring patterns, symbols, or anomalies that appear consistently throughout your dream life, functioning as reliable indicators of the dreaming state itself. These are personal markers unique to each individual dreamer, patterns that repeat across countless nights and manifest in ways that should seem impossible or logically inconsistent within waking reality, yet within the dream narrative, they feel entirely natural and acceptable. A dream sign might be the consistent appearance of a particular person who does not exist in waking life, or the repeated occurrence of impossible physics, such as the ability to fly or walk through solid walls, or perhaps environmental details like a city that shifts its geography each time you visit, or the perpetual dimness of your dream world despite the absence of any logical light source. The mechanism underlying dream signs operates through the principle of personal pattern recognition, combined with the brain's capacity to normalize whatever context surrounds it in the sleeping state. Your mind, operating under different neurological parameters during REM sleep, naturally creates recurring elements because consciousness tends toward pattern and repetition as a means of constructing coherent narratives, even narratives that fundamentally defy physical law. By consciously studying and documenting these signs through dream journals and reflection, you begin to internalize their significance, creating what practitioners call a reality check trigger. When you encounter these signs during subsequent dreams, the act of recognizing them as impossible or unusual within the waking world context can trigger lucid awareness. What makes dream signs particularly powerful as a lucid dreaming technique is that despite their illogical nature, we have normalized our acceptance of them completely while dreaming, moving through impossible circumstances with absolute conviction in their reality. This contradiction between what we accept in dreams and what we know to be true while awake creates the exact cognitive friction necessary for breakthrough lucidity to occur. The Monroe Technique, developed by Robert Monroe, founder of the Monroe Institute, represents one of the most systematic and scientifically oriented approaches to inducing out-of-body experiences and lucid dreaming states through deliberate neurological manipulation. The technique begins as you lie in bed in a comfortable position, fully relaxed but maintaining complete consciousness, and involves a methodical progression through what Monroe termed focus levels, which are distinct mental states corresponding to different frequencies of brainwave activity and states of consciousness. You start by achieving a deeply relaxed physical state while keeping your mind alert and aware. Then you focus your attention on the vibrations that naturally occur as your body transitions between wakefulness and sleep, those peculiar sensations of energy or tingling that most people dismiss without acknowledgement. The mechanism underlying this approach rests on the observation that during the hypnagogic state, the boundary between conscious awareness and unconscious dreaming becomes permeable and negotiable, allowing your rational mind to maintain observational capacity while your body enters complete sleep paralysis. By deliberately directing attention toward these natural physiological vibrations and progressively deepening your mental focus through imagined spatial environments and frequency states, you create a conscious pathway through what is normally an unconscious transition, essentially training your awareness to navigate the gap between waking reality and the dream realm. The psychological foundation involves understanding that consciousness exists on a spectrum rather than as a binary state of on or off, and that by maintaining intentional focus during the normally automatic process of sleep onset, you can access intermediate states of consciousness that typically remain inaccessible to the untrained mind. The body awareness method begins with a deliberate shift in attention from the external environment to the intricate sensations occurring within your physical form, a practice that involves systematically scanning through each region of your body while maintaining conscious awareness as you transition into sleep. As you lie in bed in a comfortable position, you direct your focus to your toes, noticing any tingling, warmth, pressure, or subtle vibrations present in that area, and then you slowly move this concentrated attention upward through your feet, ankles, calves, and thighs, pausing at each location to genuinely feel whatever sensations arise without judgment or expectation. The psychological mechanism underlying this technique operates on the principle that consciousness naturally follows attention, and by anchoring your awareness to distinct physical sensations rather than allowing your mind to wander into abstract thought patterns, you create a continuous thread of mindfulness that persists even as your body enters the paralysis phase of sleep. This sustained internal focus prevents the typical dissociation between conscious awareness and bodily sensations that normally occurs during the transition to sleep, essentially training your mind to remain an observer of the process rather than losing itself in the darkness. As you progress through your entire body with this methodical awareness, moving through your abdomen, chest, shoulders, arms, neck, and finally your head, you will begin to notice that your conscious mind remains engaged and alert while your physical body simultaneously relaxes and enters the sleep state, creating a unique scenario where both conditions exist simultaneously. The body awareness practice works because it exploits the natural tendency of consciousness to fragment during sleep onset, instead weaving that consciousness through sensation rather than allowing it to scatter into dreams. And this continuous sensory thread serves as a lifeline that prevents you from losing lucidity during the hypnagogic transition. The target technique begins with a simple and deliberate practice that most people engage in without recognizing its profound implications for consciousness exploration. Before entering sleep, you select a specific location, object, or person to serve as your mental focal point throughout the night, establishing what might be called an internal compass that your dreaming mind can navigate toward during the vulnerable hours of rest. This chosen target becomes the gravitational center of your intention, a destination that your consciousness has been primed to recognize and seek out, much like how a homing pigeon maintains awareness of its roost even when flying through unfamiliar territories. You might choose your childhood home with all its specific textures and colors, or perhaps a beloved person's face, or even an imaginary location you have constructed in detail through repeated visualization. The mechanics underlying this approach operate on the principle that consciousness naturally follows the strongest patterns of attention we establish before sleep, creating neural pathways that persist even as the logical brain releases its grip during the descent into dreaming. When you hold this target firmly in your awareness during the transition from wakefulness to sleep, you are essentially creating a beacon that your dream self recognizes as significant and seeks to maintain contact with throughout the night. The psychology emerges from our fundamental tendency toward goal-oriented behavior. The mind, even in its sleeping state, maintains organizational hierarchies of importance and will naturally gravitate toward what we have marked as essential. What makes this technique particularly interesting is how utterly normalized the process has become in our culture, despite the fact that most people never consciously employ it or even acknowledge that their dreams tend to reflect their final waking thoughts. Imagine lying in bed in the darkness, your body growing heavier with each breath, and you begin to focus intently on a single point in space somewhere within your visual field, perhaps a spot on the ceiling or an imaginary dot floating in the void of your closed eyelids, holding your attention there with unwavering concentration as your consciousness begins to fracture between the anchor point and the sensation of your physical form sinking deeper into the mattress beneath you. The point shift method operates on the principle that consciousness can be redirected and anchored through sustained focal attention, functioning somewhat like a lighthouse beam that guides your awareness through the transitional states between wakefulness and sleep, preventing the mind from wandering into the natural dissolution that typically precedes unconsciousness. What makes this technique particularly effective is that it engages the reticular activating system, the neural mechanism responsible for filtering sensory information and maintaining awareness, allowing you to remain consciously present while your body undergoes the physiological processes of sleep onset, essentially creating a state where your mind watches itself cross the threshold that most people traverse unconsciously every single night. The psychological mechanism at work here involves the brain's natural tendency to focus on whatever object or point receives sustained attention, and by deliberately choosing what that focal point shall be, you are essentially hijacking your own attention system and steering it toward maintaining consciousness rather than allowing it to fade into the default mode of sleep. The stretch method begins with your body in a state of physical tension, where you deliberately tighten and then release various muscle groups throughout your entire form, starting from your toes and systematically progressing upward toward your head and neck, creating a wave of relaxation that moves through you like water flowing down a mountainside. As you lie in bed preparing for sleep, you focus your attention on your feet first, curling your toes downward with moderate force while maintaining steady breathing, holding that tension for several seconds before releasing completely and noticing the sudden rush of relief that floods through those muscles. You then move to your calves, tightening them by pointing your feet away from your body, then your thighs by squeezing them firmly, then your buttocks and lower back, your abdomen, your chest, your hands and forearms, your upper arms and shoulders, your neck, your jaw, and finally your facial muscles including your eyes and forehead, each time building tension deliberately before releasing it with full awareness of the contrast between tension and relaxation states. The psychological mechanism underlying this technique rests on the principle that conscious awareness of physical sensation naturally anchors your mind in the present moment, preventing the scattered thought patterns that typically interrupt the transition into sleep and lucid dreaming states. When you engage in progressive muscle relaxation while maintaining awareness of each sensation, your brain becomes increasingly attuned to bodily feedback, which naturally trains your consciousness to remain present even as your body drifts towards sleep, essentially bridging the gap between waking awareness and the dream state. This creates what practitioners describe as a hyperaware relaxation, where your mind remains lucid and observant while your muscles become progressively more settled and still. As you lie in bed preparing for sleep, you may notice a peculiar sensation of heaviness throughout your physical form, as though your entire body has been compressed into the mattress beneath you, creating a kind of gravitational anchor that keeps your consciousness tethered to flesh and bone. This experience of feeling weighted down, of experiencing your body as a dense and immovable object, is something nearly everyone encounters during the transition between wakefulness and sleep, yet it persists as a largely unexamined phenomenon that we simply accept as the natural state of embodiment. The energy body loosening technique works by deliberately cultivating an awareness of your subtle form, that non-physical dimension of yourself that practitioners and contemplatives have long described as existing in parallel with your physical anatomy. And by gently directing your attention toward the sensation of this energetic layer becoming increasingly permeable and fluid. To practice this method, begin by mentally scanning your body from head to toe, but rather than simply acknowledging the physical tissues and organs, attempt to perceive the electromagnetic field, the vital force, the subtle body that infuses every cell with consciousness and animation. As you move through this scanning process, imagine that with each inhalation, this energetic body becomes slightly less dense, slightly more gossamer-like, as though it were transforming from solid matter into something resembling a luminous mist or ethereal outline that extends slightly beyond your physical boundaries. The mechanism underlying this technique rests upon the observation that consciousness can be directed towards subtle layers of perception, and that by shifting your attention away from the density of muscle and bone toward the lighter frequencies of energy and vibration, you naturally begin to loosen the grip that physical sensation has upon your awareness. This creates a psychological framework where the body feels less imprisoning and more transitional, less like a cage and more like a temporary vehicle that consciousness can eventually separate from or transcend during sleep. As you lie in bed preparing for sleep, imagine your body as a vertical channel of energy running from the base of your spine all the way to the crown of your head, and within this channel exist 7 distinct energy centers, each one corresponding to different aspects of your physical, emotional, and spiritual existence. Begin by focusing your attention on the root chakra located at the base of your spine, visualizing a deep red sphere of glowing light that pulses with warmth and stability, grounding you to the earth beneath your body. And as you breathe slowly and deliberately, imagine this red light intensifying with each inhalation, creating a sense of security and belonging. Move your awareness upward to the sacral chakra just below your navel, picturing a vibrant orange light that represents creativity, sexuality, and emotional flow, allowing this warm color to expand and rotate gently as you continue your measured breathing. Progress further up through your solar plexus chakra at your stomach, visualizing a bright golden yellow light that embodies personal power, confidence, and transformation, feeling this light energize your core with each breath you take. Transition to your heart chakra in the center of your chest, imagining an emerald green or soft pink light that radiates unconditional love, compassion, and connection, and let this soothing color calm your entire being. Move to your throat chakra, seeing a brilliant sky blue light representing truth, communication, and self-expression, allowing this color to resonate with peaceful clarity. Continue to your third eye chakra between your eyebrows, picturing an indigo violet light that opens your intuition, imagination, and inner vision, deepening your connection to the dream realm. Finally, visualize your crown chakra at the top of your head as a luminous white or violet light connecting you to higher consciousness and universal awareness. Imagine yourself lying in bed in the moments before sleep, your hands resting naturally at your sides or upon your chest, and you begin to focus your entire conscious attention on the visual appearance of your hands as they rest there in the darkness or dim light of your bedroom. You observe the contours of your fingers, the subtle shadows cast across your palms, the way your hands rise and fall with each breath you take, and you maintain this focused observation without judgment or expectation, simply allowing your awareness to settle into this singular point of attention. This technique operates on the principle that by anchoring your conscious mind to a specific physical location that you can actually perceive with your eyes open or semi-open, you create a bridge between waking awareness and the dream state that naturally follows. As your body becomes progressively heavier and your muscles relax more deeply into the mattress, your conscious attention remains tethered to your hands, providing a continuity of awareness that prevents the typical jarring transition where consciousness simply blinks out and you find yourself dreaming without remembering the moment you crossed over. The mechanism underlying this practice involves the peculiar nature of hand recognition in dreams, as hands are notoriously difficult for the dreaming mind to render with full clarity and consistency, meaning that if you have established the habit of examining your hands with deliberate attention during waking hours, this same impulse will carry forward into your dreaming state, causing you to look down at your hands within the dream and immediately recognize their strangeness or impossibility, thereby triggering lucid awareness. What makes this approach particularly elegant is how it leverages an aspect of human neurology that most people never consciously exploit, transforming a simple body part that we glance at countless times throughout our day into a reliable tool for bridging the consciousness gap between sleeping and waking states. As you settle into the threshold between wakefulness and sleep, consider the simple yet profound act of rubbing your hands together with deliberate intention and focused awareness. Begin by bringing your palms together at chest level, then execute slow, deliberate friction between them, feeling the warmth that builds gradually with each passing moment as the physical contact generates heat through the interaction of skin against skin. Press your palms firmly enough to create noticeable sensation without causing discomfort, and maintain a steady rhythm that becomes almost meditative in its consistency, allowing your mind to anchor itself entirely to the tactile feedback emerging from your hands. The mechanism underlying this technique functions through the principle of embodied awareness, whereby concentrated attention on a specific physical sensation creates a bridge between conscious deliberation and the increasingly dreamlike state of your mind. As your rational thoughts begin to dissolve and fade, the persistent sensation in your hands remains vivid and tangible, serving as an anchor point that your awareness can grasp as your body approaches paralysis and your dream body begins to form. The sensations you feel in your hands during the early stages of sleep can theoretically carry over into the dream state itself, becoming a touchstone of lucidity that alerts you to the fact that you are dreaming. What makes this technique particularly compelling is how it leverages a fundamentally ordinary action that humans have performed throughout history for warmth and comfort. Yet we have somehow accepted that this simple gesture becomes impossible once sleep truly arrives, even though the neurological pathways remain functional throughout the dreaming process. We have normalized the assumption that physical sensation must disappear at sleep onset, yet this technique challenges that deeply ingrained assumption by suggesting that intentional awareness can persist and even intensify, creating a continuity of consciousness that bridges the normally distinct states of waking and dreaming existence. The practice of using verbal commands represents one of the most direct and intentional methods for establishing conscious control within the dream state, operating on the fundamental principle that language and conscious intention can bridge the gap between waking awareness and sleeping consciousness. As you lie in bed preparing for sleep, you begin to speak simple, affirmative statements aloud or internally with unwavering conviction, such as, "I am becoming lucid in my dreams tonight," or "I will recognize when I am dreaming," repeating these phrases with rhythmic consistency until they become the last conscious thought you hold before drifting into slumber. The mechanism underlying this technique rests upon the psychological concept of priming, whereby repeated exposure to specific ideas and intentions creates neural pathways that remain active even as your conscious mind transitions into sleep, essentially programming your subconscious mind to maintain awareness of your stated objective. Furthermore, the act of verbalizing these commands engages multiple sensory and cognitive systems simultaneously: auditory processing, linguistic comprehension, and intentional focus, which collectively strengthen the neurological imprint of your lucid dreaming goal and make it more likely to surface within your dream narratives. What renders this technique particularly fascinating is that despite our modern understanding of neuroscience and consciousness, we continue to underestimate the profound power of simple verbal repetition and conscious declaration, almost as though ancient peoples understood something about the relationship between spoken word and mental manifestation that our contemporary rationality has somehow obscured rather than clarified. The persistence of this method across centuries and cultures suggests that human consciousness responds to language and intention in ways that operate independently of whether we fully understand the mechanism. And perhaps this acceptance of mystery, alongside empirical practice, represents the most mature approach to these liminal states between sleep and wakefulness. Consider the moment when you find yourself in a dream state, confused and disoriented, surrounded by imagery that seems to shift and waver at the edges of your perception, where the logic of the dream world permits things that would never occur in waking life, yet you accept these impossibilities without question or hesitation. The technique of demanding clarity involves deliberately pausing within this dream state and making a conscious demand, a forceful internal statement that you require absolute clarity and lucidity in this moment and in this space. You might speak internally with intensity and conviction, saying something such as, "I demand clarity now," or show me clearly what I need to see, allowing these words to carry the weight of genuine intention rather than casual suggestion. What happens in this process is that you are essentially overriding the default acceptance mechanism that typically governs dream consciousness, that peculiar feature of our sleeping mind which allows us to believe in the most preposterous scenarios without any internal objection or critical evaluation. The psychological mechanism at work here involves the activation of your metacognitive awareness, that part of your consciousness that observes and evaluates your own thinking process. And by making this demand with genuine force and expectation, you are signaling to your entire system that you refuse to remain in the fog of unconscious dreaming. This technique works because it introduces an element of authority and agency into a state where you typically surrender all control to the subconscious processes that generate the dream narrative. And it establishes a kind of contract with your deeper mind that clarity and understanding are non-negotiable. What remains remarkable is how readily we accept the haziness and confusion of dreams as inevitable and unchangeable, as though the fog that characterizes most dreams is some immutable law of sleep, rather than a feature we can consciously negotiate and modify through focused intention and determined demand. As you lie in bed preparing for sleep, begin by directing your full attention to the physical sensations of your body making contact with the mattress beneath you, and notice how the weight of your head settles into the pillow with a particular pressure that you can feel distributed across the back of your skull and neck. Pay careful attention to where your shoulders touch the bed, the exact points of contact along your spine, and how your lower back either presses firmly into the surface or creates small gaps where air passes between your body and the mattress. Extend this awareness down through your hips, observing the broader surface area where you make contact. Then gradually move your attention to your thighs, knees, calves, and finally your heels and the soles of your feet, noticing which parts of your legs bear weight and which ones rest more lightly. This systematic grounding technique works because the human brain has a remarkable capacity to anchor consciousness in the present moment through somatic sensation. And when you deliberately focus on the tactile reality of your body touching solid matter, you create a neurological state that is fundamentally incompatible with the scattered, abstract thinking that typically precedes sleep disruption. The mechanism operates on the principle that sustained attention to physical detail requires sustained activation of sensory processing pathways in the brain, which naturally calms the overactive default mode network that generates anxiety and racing thoughts. What is remarkable about this state of affairs is that despite our sophisticated understanding of neurobiology and psychology, most people continue to struggle with insomnia by attempting to force sleep through willpower or by obsessing over whether sleep will come, rather than simply anchoring themselves in the undeniable reality of their body's material presence in the world. Throughout your waking day, you engage in countless tactile interactions with your environment without giving them much conscious attention. Yet these moments of physical contact form the foundation of how your brain constructs its understanding of reality itself. Consider the simple act of placing your hand against a wall, a table, a piece of fabric, or even the ground beneath your feet, and notice how your mind automatically registers a cascade of sensory information including texture, temperature, density, and resistance, all of which combine to create an overwhelming sense of certainty about the solidity and permanence of the object you are touching. This phenomenon becomes particularly interesting when you consider that in the dream state, your brain generates equally convincing tactile sensations without any actual physical stimulation occurring at all, which means your sensory apparatus is being triggered entirely by neural activity rather than by external contact. The mechanism underlying this technique involves training yourself to become acutely aware of how your hands and fingers experience different textures and surfaces throughout your day, creating what researchers call a heightened baseline of tactile awareness that your consciousness begins to expect and monitor constantly. When you fall asleep tonight, this heightened sensitivity to texture and physical contact creates a kind of psychological anchor that your dreaming mind cannot easily replicate with perfect consistency. Because while your brain can generate the visual appearance of surfaces, it struggles more profoundly to generate the nuanced, complex, layered quality of genuine tactile feedback that you have been cultivating throughout your waking hours. Prospective memory is the cognitive ability to remember to perform an intended action at some point in the future, and this phenomenon becomes particularly fascinating when we consider how it operates during the twilight state between wakefulness and sleep. Imagine you have set an intention before bed to become lucid in your dreams, perhaps by telling yourself that you will recognize the dream state when you encounter certain signs or inconsistencies in the dream environment. Throughout the day, you might have reinforced this intention through visualization or written affirmations, creating a mental plan that seems to exist somewhere in the back of your consciousness. As you lie in bed and begin to drift into the deeper stages of sleep, this intention does not simply vanish with your waking awareness. Instead, it appears to persist in a dormant state within your mind, waiting like a sentinel for the moment when you actually enter the dream state. When you find yourself dreaming, suddenly and often unexpectedly, you recognize something unusual or perform a reality check, and the intention surfaces into your dream consciousness, allowing you to realize that you are dreaming. The psychological mechanism underlying prospective memory suggests that our brains naturally encode future-oriented goals and maintain some level of monitoring for cues that signal the appropriate time to execute these intentions, even across the boundary between sleep stages. This encoding appears to involve the prefrontal cortex and other memory-related structures that continue to maintain baseline activity even during sleep, creating a kind of background process that tracks our intentions. What makes this particularly remarkable is that prospective memory seems to operate almost independently of our explicit, conscious effort during sleep. You do not need to actively think about your intention to become lucid while you are dreaming. Rather, the intention appears to have become embedded in the fabric of your cognitive processing, operating beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. Autosuggestion is the practice of deliberately implanting positive statements and affirming beliefs directly into your own consciousness through repetition and focused intention, a technique that works particularly well when practiced in the transitional states between wakefulness and sleep, when your critical mind becomes more permeable to suggestion. As you lie in bed preparing for sleep, you would select a simple, powerful statement related to your intention, such as, "I will become lucid in my dreams tonight," or "I am aware and conscious during my dreams," and then repeat this phrase silently or aloud with genuine conviction, allowing the words to penetrate deeper into your subconscious mind with each repetition. The mechanism behind autosuggestion operates on the principle that your conscious mind acts as a gatekeeper to your subconscious. And during the hypnagogic state, when you are neither fully awake nor fully asleep, this gatekeeper becomes temporarily relaxed and more accepting of new programming, allowing suggestions to bypass the usual rational filters that would normally reject them during waking hours. What makes this technique particularly effective is that the subconscious mind does not distinguish between external suggestions received from others and internal suggestions we give to ourselves, treating both equally as legitimate information worthy of integration into our belief systems and behavioral patterns. Despite the fact that we intellectually understand autosuggestion is simply us talking to ourselves, and despite knowing that our own voice should carry no more inherent authority than our conscious thoughts, the practice continues to produce measurable changes in our dreams, our awareness, and our ability to achieve lucid states, suggesting that something deeper within our psyche responds powerfully to the simple act of consistent self-affirmation delivered with sincere intention. As you lie in bed with your eyes closed and your body beginning to relax into the mattress, you might find yourself naturally thinking about what you hope will happen during the night ahead, and this simple act of mental preparation forms the foundation of one of the most powerful yet underutilized techniques for cultivating lucid dreams and facilitating astral projection experiences. Intention setting is the practice of consciously directing your awareness toward a specific outcome before you fall asleep, essentially programming your subconscious mind to prioritize certain experiences or realizations once you enter the dream state. And the mechanism behind this technique operates through the way our brains organize information based on what we deem important or relevant. When you consciously state or mentally rehearse an intention, such as, "Tonight I will become lucid in my dreams," or "I will maintain awareness as I fall asleep," you are activating what neuroscientists call the reticular activating system, a network of neurons in your brain that filters sensory information and highlights whatever matches your stated priorities, much like how you suddenly notice red cars everywhere after deciding you want to buy one. This same system continues operating during sleep and dreaming, making it more likely that when surreal or impossible events occur in your dreams, some part of your awareness will recognize these anomalies and trigger lucidity, because you have programmed your mind to watch for exactly these moments. The psychological mechanism also involves priming your metacognitive abilities, which are the mental capacities that allow you to think about your own thinking, and by repeatedly affirming your intention to become aware within dreams, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with self-reflection and critical thinking. As you prepare yourself for sleep, you begin to repeat carefully chosen phrases with intention and focus, speaking or mentally reciting statements such as, "I will have a lucid dream tonight," or "I am aware in my dreams," or "My dreams are vivid and clear," allowing these words to settle into your consciousness like seeds planted in fertile soil. And as you continue this practice night after night, something remarkable begins to occur within the architecture of your mind. For the repetition of these affirmations creates neural pathways that reinforce the expectation of lucidity, essentially training your brain to recognize the dream state through a process of consistent cognitive conditioning that operates on the principle that what we repeatedly affirm to ourselves becomes a foundation upon which our subconscious mind constructs its reality. The mechanism underlying this technique rests upon a fundamental truth about human consciousness: that our beliefs, expectations, and self-directed suggestions possess measurable influence over our neurological responses and behavioral patterns. And when you affirm something with genuine conviction before entering the vulnerable state of sleep, you are essentially programming your mind to prioritize that intention during the dream cycle, much like setting an alarm that your consciousness will recognize when the conditions for dreaming arrive. Once you have achieved lucidity within a dream and recognized the extraordinary nature of your circumstance, the challenge that immediately presents itself is the maintenance of that lucid state. For lucid dreams possess a peculiar fragility that threatens to dissolve the moment excessive excitement or analytical scrutiny takes hold within your consciousness. The experience of becoming lucid often triggers a surge of emotional intensity, a profound recognition that you are aware within a dream, and this very awareness can paradoxically destabilize the delicate neural configurations that sustain the lucid state, causing the dream to collapse into either full wakefulness or a return to non-lucid dreaming from which you have just escaped. What occurs in this moment is a fundamental tension between the desire to act and explore, which naturally accompanies the realization of lucidity, and the requirement for a kind of gentle, sustained attention that neither grasps too tightly nor relaxes too completely into the dream environment. The mechanism underlying this challenge involves the balance between the neural regions associated with self-awareness and metacognition, which are hyperactive during lucidity, and the sensory and emotional circuits that maintain immersion within the dream world itself. When the prefrontal cortex becomes overactive through excitement or intense focus, it can trigger the return of full waking consciousness, shattering the dream entirely. Conversely, if you become too absorbed in the dream narrative and forget your lucid awareness, you slip back into ordinary non-lucid dreaming. Experienced lucid dreamers develop techniques to sustain this middle ground, such as engaging in slow, deliberate movements within the dream, maintaining a quiet internal dialogue that acknowledges lucidity without amplifying emotional response, or focusing on tactile sensations like rubbing dream hands together to ground awareness in the sensory experience while preventing excessive analytical activation. There exists a peculiar moment in the early morning hours when consciousness hovers between sleep and wakefulness, a liminal space where the dreamer possesses just enough awareness to recognize they have been dreaming, yet retain enough drowsiness to potentially slip back into the dream narrative they have just abandoned. This technique involves deliberately cultivating this transitional state, setting a clear intention before sleep that upon waking from a dream, you will not fully open your eyes or move your body, but instead will remain perfectly still and attempt to re-enter the exact dream you have just experienced, as though you are turning a page backward in a book rather than closing it entirely. The mechanism underlying this practice rests upon the understanding that dreams do not truly disappear when we wake. Rather, they exist in a form of neurological dormancy, their imagery and narrative threads still accessible in recent memory, their emotional resonance still vibrating through the neural pathways that activated them moments before. When you wake from a dream and immediately try to return to it, you are essentially asking your brain to reactivate the same pattern of neural firing that created that dream, using the memory of the dream itself as a map back into the dream state, much like following a path you have just walked in reverse. Most people experience this phenomenon entirely by accident, waking in the middle of a particularly vivid or memorable dream, and then drifting back into it naturally, experiencing a surprising moment of lucidity or a strange sense of continuity that feels almost impossible. Yet what appears to be mere luck or natural occurrence is actually a learnable skill, one that can be systematized and refined through intention and practice. And it is remarkable how readily we accept that this happens spontaneously without ever considering that we might consciously direct the process ourselves, essentially training our minds to maintain the thread of dream consciousness through the waking moment rather than allowing it to scatter. Dream incubation is the deliberate practice of planting a specific intention, question, or scenario into your consciousness before sleep, with the expectation that your dreaming mind will explore, develop, and provide insight or narrative around that seeded concept throughout the night. To engage in this technique, you would typically spend the final moments before sleep focusing your attention on a particular theme, whether that might be solving a creative problem you have been wrestling with during waking hours, exploring a relationship dynamic that troubles you, visiting a specific location you wish to experience in dream form, or even posing a direct question to your subconscious mind as though it were a trusted advisor capable of providing wisdom and guidance. The practice involves repetition and reinforcement, often suggesting to yourself that you will dream about this chosen subject, that you will remember these dreams with perfect clarity, and that the insights gained will be meaningful and applicable to your waking life. Some practitioners write their intention on paper and place it beneath their pillow, while others simply repeat a phrase or visualize an image related to their chosen topic until the boundary between waking thought and sleep becomes increasingly blurred and indistinct. The psychological mechanism underlying dream incubation operates through the principle of mental priming, whereby repeated exposure to concept activates neural pathways associated with that idea, making your brain substantially more likely to incorporate related imagery, symbols, and narratives into the dream sequences your mind naturally generates during sleep. When you focus intensely on a particular theme before sleep, you are essentially directing your brain's attention systems to remain engaged with that content, and this directed attention continues operating beneath the threshold of conscious awareness throughout the night, influencing the associative processes that construct your dreams. As you drift deeper into the threshold between wakefulness and sleep, your mind begins to construct increasingly vivid scenarios that feel remarkably authentic. Yet something within you senses their illusory nature, and you find yourself wondering whether the environment surrounding you is genuinely real or simply a projection of your sleeping consciousness. Dream stabilizing questions represent a technique where you mentally pose specific inquiries to yourself throughout the day and carry these questions into your dreams, asking them repeatedly within the dream landscape itself, until the answers you receive begin to reveal inconsistencies that trigger lucid awareness. The mechanism underlying this practice operates on the principle that waking life and dream life operate according to different rules and limitations, and when you persistently question the nature of your current reality by asking things like, "Am I dreaming right now?" or "What is the last thing I remember before arriving here?" your mind develops a habit of critical reflection that eventually activates even during dreams when your rational faculties are typically offline. The questions force your consciousness to examine evidence and apply logical scrutiny to sensory experiences. And because dreams routinely violate physical laws and contain narrative absurdities that waking consciousness would immediately reject, the mere act of questioning reality with genuine curiosity tends to expose these dreamlike qualities and shatter the illusion. What remains remarkable is how thoroughly our minds accept dream environments as genuine while we are experiencing them, despite the fact that we have spent our entire lives knowing that dreams are fundamentally different from reality. And yet we continue to accept impossible architecture, miraculous shifts in location, and the sudden appearance of deceased relatives as perfectly normal occurrences that require no explanation whatsoever. Galantamine is a naturally occurring alkaloid compound found in certain plants, particularly spider lily and snowdrop varieties, and it has gained significant attention within the lucid dreaming community as a potential cognitive enhancer that may facilitate the onset of lucid dreams during sleep cycles. When an individual takes galantamine as a supplement, typically in doses ranging from 4 to 8 milligrams, the compound works by inhibiting the enzyme acetylcholinesterase, which normally breaks down acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that plays a crucial role in memory formation, attention, and awareness during the dream state. By preventing the breakdown of acetylcholine, galantamine effectively increases the concentration of this neurotransmitter in the brain, particularly in regions associated with consciousness and metacognition, thereby theoretically enhancing one's ability to recognize the dream state while experiencing it. The mechanism behind this process operates on the principle that lucid dreaming requires a unique neurological state combining the imagery and emotional intensity of REM sleep with the self-reflective awareness normally associated with wakefulness. And elevated acetylcholine levels may bridge this gap more effectively than the brain would accomplish naturally. Practitioners typically employ a protocol wherein they take galantamine during a natural awakening in the middle of the night, after having slept for approximately 4 to 6 hours, then return to sleep with the intention of becoming lucid, capitalizing on the heightened neurochemical state during subsequent REM periods when the compound reaches its peak effectiveness in the brain. Choline pairing represents a nutritional approach to enhancing dream recall and lucidity by combining choline supplementation with specific timing protocols that align with natural sleep cycles and REM stage windows. When practitioners consume choline-rich compounds such as alpha-GPC or CDP-choline approximately 4 to 6 hours before sleep, the substance circulates through the bloodstream and crosses the blood-brain barrier, where it becomes incorporated into acetylcholine synthesis within the brain. Acetylcholine is the primary neurotransmitter responsible for REM sleep generation and the heightened neural activity that characterizes vivid dreaming states. And by elevating baseline acetylcholine availability during sleep onset, the technique theoretically amplifies the neurochemical conditions necessary for conscious dream awareness. The mechanism operates on the principle that lucid dreaming requires simultaneous activation of both the prefrontal cortex, which governs metacognition and self-awareness, and the visual-emotional centers of the brain that generate dream imagery, a state that choline supplementation may facilitate by providing the raw neurochemical substrate for sustained acetylcholine production throughout extended REM periods. What makes choline pairing particularly compelling is how it has become normalized within lucid dreaming communities despite limited large-scale peer-reviewed research directly confirming its efficacy. Yet countless practitioners report experiencing increased dream vividness and spontaneous lucidity following choline consumption, suggesting either a genuine pharmacological effect or a powerful placebo response that produces measurable subjective experiences. Mugwort tea represents one of the oldest herbal traditions in cultures spanning from ancient Egypt to medieval Europe to traditional Chinese medicine, where practitioners have long believed that consuming this botanical preparation before sleep enhances the vividness and recall of dreams while simultaneously facilitating transitions into lucid dreaming states and astral projection experiences. The process itself is remarkably straightforward. Dried mugwort leaves are steeped in hot water for several minutes, creating a bitter, slightly earthy infusion that is then consumed approximately 30 minutes to 1 hour before bedtime, with many practitioners reporting that the tea produces a noticeable shift in their dream consciousness within the first few nights of consistent use. The mechanism behind mugwort's purported effectiveness lies in its chemical composition, particularly compounds such as thujone and other volatile oils that are believed to influence neural activity and potentially enhance REM sleep cycles, while simultaneously increasing the brain's ability to achieve metacognitive awareness within dreams, thereby creating the conditions necessary for lucid dreaming to occur naturally. Psychologically, the act of preparing and consuming a specialized herbal tea before sleep creates a powerful ritual that signals to the mind and body that a transition into dream work is about to begin, establishing what neuroscientists might recognize as a conditioned response that primes consciousness for heightened awareness during sleep stages. Calea Zacatechichi, known colloquially as dream herb or bitter grass, is a plant native to Mexico that has been used for centuries by indigenous peoples specifically to enhance dream clarity and promote lucid dreaming experiences. And in contemporary practice, many individuals prepare this herb as a tea consumed before sleep in the belief that it will heighten their ability to recognize when they are dreaming and maintain conscious awareness within the dream state. The preparation typically involves steeping dried leaves in hot water, creating a bitter infusion that practitioners drink 30 minutes to an hour before lying down, with the expectation that the herb's active compounds will interact with neurotransmitter systems responsible for dream generation and memory consolidation during rapid eye movement sleep. The psychological mechanism underlying Calea Zacatechichi's purported effects appears to involve its influence on acetylcholine levels in the brain, since this neurotransmitter is associated with vivid dreaming and the prefrontal cortex activation necessary for metacognitive awareness within dreams. And the herb's bitter constituents may stimulate certain receptors that enhance dream vividness and improve the sleeper's ability to maintain a thread of conscious observation even as they navigate the fantastical narratives of their sleeping mind. Silene Capensis, commonly known as Kosa dream root or African dream root, is a plant native to the Eastern Cape region of South Africa that has been used for centuries by indigenous Kosa people as a natural aid for enhancing dream vividness and facilitating lucid dreaming experiences. The root of this plant contains alkaloid compounds that appear to influence the neurochemistry of sleep and dream states, creating a unique pharmacological environment within the brain that encourages heightened dream recall and sensory intensity during REM sleep cycles. When an individual consumes a small amount of powdered Silene Capensis root, typically mixed with water or taken as a tea before sleep, the active compounds gradually accumulate in the nervous system throughout the night, subtly shifting the balance of neurotransmitters that govern the sleep-wake cycle and dream generation. The mechanism appears to involve a gentle modulation of acetylcholine and other neurochemical systems that are intimately connected to dream vividness and lucidity, essentially creating a state where the dreaming mind becomes more alert and self-aware without fully waking the sleeping body. This botanical intervention works through a delicate biological process where the plant's alkaloids do not jolt the system into wakefulness, but instead create a permeable boundary between sleeping and waking consciousness, allowing the dreamer to observe and potentially direct their dreams from within the dream itself. What remains particularly fascinating is how this practice has persisted across generations among the Kosa people despite the absence of modern scientific validation, passed down through oral tradition and cultural memory as an essential tool for spiritual development and inner exploration, suggesting that ancient peoples understood something fundamental about plant medicine and consciousness that modern science is only beginning to rediscover and document. The practice of taking melatonin supplements to facilitate sleep and enhance dream recall has become increasingly common among those seeking to induce lucid dreams and astral projections. Yet the timing of this intake remains one of the most misunderstood aspects of the entire supplementation approach. When someone decides to use melatonin as a tool for their exploration of consciousness, they typically obtain a bottle from their local pharmacy or online retailer, read the basic instructions on the label, and begin taking it at night without fully understanding the intricate relationship between the timing of the dose and their body's natural circadian rhythms. The critical window for melatonin effectiveness typically occurs between 30 minutes to 2 hours before the desired sleep onset time, as this is when the supplement can most effectively synchronize with your body's natural melatonin production cycle and reinforce the signals that tell your brain and body that sleep is approaching. However, many people take melatonin far too close to their actual sleep time, hoping that it will work immediately like a sedative, when in fact it functions as a chronobiotic substance that works best when given adequate time to integrate with your existing physiology. The psychological mechanism at work here involves our deeply ingrained expectations about how medicines should function, stemming from our lifelong experience with acute pain relievers and other pharmaceuticals that produce immediate effects, creating a cognitive framework through which we interpret all substances as requiring immediate proximity to the desired outcome. We have normalized the concept of taking melatonin as a last-minute sleep aid, much like taking an aspirin for a headache, despite the fundamental difference in how these substances interact with our neurological systems. And this persistent misalignment between our expectations and biological reality continues to perplex and frustrate those seeking reliable results from supplementation protocols designed to enhance dream clarity and facilitate the transition into altered states of consciousness. Valerian Root has been used for centuries as a natural sleep aid, and many people who seek to enhance their dream recall and prepare themselves for lucid dreaming experiences turn to this herbal supplement in the hours before sleep, believing that its mild sedative properties might create the ideal conditions for deeper rest and more vivid nocturnal visions. The plant itself, native to Europe and Asia, contains compounds such as valerianic acid and various alkaloids that interact with the brain's neurotransmitter systems, particularly those involving gamma-minobutyric acid, commonly known as GABA, which is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter responsible for calming neural activity and promoting relaxation throughout the central nervous system. When someone consumes valerian root as a tea, tincture, or capsule supplement, these active compounds are absorbed through the digestive system and gradually cross the blood-brain barrier, where they bind to receptors and encourage a state of neurological quietude that makes the transition from waking consciousness to sleep more gradual and less jarring, which theoretically allows the mind to maintain a thread of awareness as the body enters deeper stages of sleep. The mechanism behind this effect operates through the enhancement of GABA signaling, which essentially tells the brain to slow down its firing patterns and reduce the constant mental chatter that typically keeps us locked in waking awareness. And by gently lowering this baseline level of cerebral activity, valerian root creates a permissive state in which the unusual neural patterns of dreaming can more easily be observed and controlled by the conscious mind. Vitamin B6, also known as pyridoxine, represents one of the most direct biochemical interventions available to those seeking to enhance dream recall and facilitate the onset of lucid dreaming states, functioning as a natural supplement that influences the neurochemical environment of sleep without requiring pharmaceutical intervention. When consumed in moderate doses, typically between 50 and 100 milligrams taken 1 to 2 hours before sleep, vitamin B6 crosses the blood-brain barrier and participates in the synthesis of neurotransmitters that are fundamental to the dream generation process, particularly serotonin and gamma-minobutyric acid, which together regulate the transitions between different stages of sleep and modulate the vividness and memorability of REM sleep experiences. The mechanism underlying this effect operates at a level so fundamental to human neurobiology that it seems almost surprising we do not consider B6 supplementation a standard practice for anyone interested in developing their dream awareness. Yet the reality is that most people experience significant vitamin B6 deficiency without ever recognizing the impact on their nocturnal consciousness, as modern diets often fail to provide adequate quantities of this essential nutrient, which is found primarily in chicken, salmon, potatoes, and various leafy greens that constitute a diminishing proportion of typical contemporary eating patterns. What makes vitamin B6 particularly intriguing as a lucid dreaming technique is how it operates silently and systematically, creating favorable neurochemical conditions that naturally increase the probability of spontaneous lucidity during dreams, requiring no active mental effort or complex visualization practices, yet we have somehow normalized the experience of forgetting our dreams entirely, treating dream amnesia as inevitable rather than as a sign of nutritional insufficiency or improper sleep architecture. Throughout human history, cultures across continents have discovered and cultivated specific plants whose properties seem to influence the quality and vividness of our dreams. And in modern times, these botanical remedies have been compiled into carefully formulated blends designed to enhance nocturnal consciousness and facilitate deeper access to the dream state. The practice involves combining herbs such as mugwort, which contains thujone and is traditionally associated with heightened dream recall, alongside chamomile for its calming properties, passion flower for its gentle sedative qualities, valerian root for its grounding earthiness, and sometimes lavender or lemon balm to create a synergistic mixture that can be consumed as a tea, tincture, or incorporated into sleep rituals several hours before bedtime. The mechanism by which these botanical compounds influence dreaming appears to operate through multiple pathways. Certain herbs may gently modulate neurotransmitter activity in ways that extend REM sleep duration or increase the brain's propensity toward vivid imagery, while others simply calm the nervous system sufficiently that the mind can relax into deeper stages of sleep, where dreams naturally become more accessible and memorable. What remains remarkable is that despite our modern pharmaceutical capabilities and advanced understanding of sleep neurobiology, we continue to rely upon these ancient herbal preparations with genuine expectation of their efficacy, treating them with an almost ritualistic reverence that suggests their value extends beyond mere chemical interaction. tapping perhaps into a psychological receptiveness that validates their use, whether through direct neurochemical action or through the profound placebo effect that accompanies intentional preparation and mindful consumption. Binaural beats represent a fascinating intersection between neuroscience and auditory perception, a phenomenon that occurs when two slightly different frequencies are played simultaneously into each ear through stereo headphones, creating the perception of a third frequency that exists only in the listener's brain. When you listen to a tone of 400 Hz in your left ear and 410 Hz in your right ear, your brain perceives a phantom beat frequency of 10 Hz, which corresponds to the alpha brainwave state associated with relaxation and light meditation. This effect operates through a process called frequency following response, wherein the brain's electrical activity naturally synchronizes with external rhythmic stimuli, a phenomenon that has been documented across numerous neuroscientific studies and remains one of the more credible mechanisms for influencing brainwave states through non-invasive means. The auditory cortex processes these two separate frequencies and generates a binaural beat in the inferior colliculus, a structure deep within the brainstem, and this synchronized neural activity can theoretically cascade through broader regions of the brain, encouraging the transition from wakefulness into the theta and delta states necessary for deep sleep and lucid dreaming. The mechanism relies on the brain's inherent tendency to seek patterns and synchronization, a fundamental property of neural tissue that evolved to help us detect meaningful sounds in our environment. Yet in this case, we harness that same property to guide ourselves towards sleep and altered consciousness. Isochronic tones represent a specific category of auditory stimulation that employs evenly spaced pulses of sound at precise frequencies to influence brainwave activity and facilitate the transition into lucid dreaming and astral projection states. Unlike binaural beats, which require stereo headphones and create an illusory frequency difference between the ears, isochronic tones work through a straightforward mechanism of audible pulses that turn on and off at regular intervals, creating a rhythmic pattern that can be perceived by anyone listening, regardless of whether they use headphones or speakers. The listener experiences distinct tones that pulse at a consistent rate, typically measured in hertz, which corresponds to the frequency range associated with different states of consciousness, ranging from the deep theta waves of sleep around 4 to 7 hertz, up through the alpha waves of relaxation around 8 to 12 hertz. The fundamental principle underlying this technique rests on the brain's natural tendency to synchronize its own electrical activity with external rhythmic stimuli, a phenomenon known as brainwave entrainment or frequency following response. When a person listens to isochronic tones set to a particular frequency, their brain gradually begins to produce brainwaves at that same frequency, theoretically facilitating a shift from waking consciousness into the deeper, more dreamlike states necessary for lucid dreaming and astral projection experiences. Remarkably, despite the straightforward nature of this mechanism and the extensive scientific research documenting brainwave synchronization, isochronic tones have become a normalized and widely accepted tool in meditation and sleep optimization communities, with countless individuals reporting profound effects from their use. Even though the subjective experience of drifting into a lucid dream state or feeling the sensation of astral projection often seems to transcend simple auditory frequency matching, yet we accept this method as a legitimate gateway to these extraordinary states of consciousness with surprisingly little skepticism or resistance. Self-hypnosis represents a fascinating psychological technique where an individual deliberately induces an altered state of consciousness through focused intention and guided internal dialogue, creating a bridge between waking awareness and the deeper layers of the mind that govern sleep and dreams. When you engage in self-hypnosis before sleep, you begin by finding a comfortable position, often lying down in darkness, and then systematically directing your attention inward through a series of deliberate mental instructions, perhaps imagining yourself descending a staircase or sinking deeper into your mattress with each breath, while your conscious mind gradually releases its grip on external concerns and allows your awareness to drift into progressively softer states of consciousness. The psychological mechanism at work here involves the deliberately weakening of the critical faculty, that part of your mind responsible for analysis and resistance to suggestion, which normally acts as a gatekeeper preventing direct access to the subconscious realm where dreams originate and where the boundaries between physical reality and imagination become permeable. As you continue this process, repeating affirmations or visualizations designed specifically to facilitate lucid dreaming or astral projection, you are essentially training your conscious mind to remain present and aware even as your body undergoes the physiological transition into sleep, creating a unique state where intentional thought continues while the sensory filters that normally separate waking from dreaming begin to dissolve and merge. Guided visualization represents one of the most accessible and naturally effective techniques for transitioning into lucid dreaming states, working by engaging your mind's eye in a deliberately constructed mental landscape that gradually blurs the boundaries between waking consciousness and sleep. When you practice guided visualization, you are essentially creating a detailed internal narrative that your mind follows with increasing absorption, directing your attention away from bodily sensations and the external environment, allowing your conscious awareness to become more intimately merged with the imagery you are generating. The process typically begins with choosing a specific location or environment that feels appealing and safe to you, perhaps a peaceful beach with warm sand and gentle waves, a forest clearing bathed in soft golden light, a cozy cabin nestled in mountains, or any other sanctuary that resonates with your personal sense of comfort and tranquility. As you lie in bed with your eyes closed, you begin to construct this environment with meticulous sensory detail, consciously imagining not only what you would see, but also the textures you would feel against your skin, the sounds that would fill the air, the scents that would reach your awareness, and even the tastes that might be present in this imagined space. The psychological mechanism underlying this technique operates on the principle that your brain cannot distinguish between vividly imagined sensory experiences and actual memories or perceptions, which means that as your visualization becomes increasingly detailed and emotionally engaging, your conscious mind gradually surrenders its grip on logical analysis and rational thought, the very mental activities that keep you locked in waking consciousness. Deep meditation represents one of the most profound and accessible techniques for transitioning into lucid dreams and astral projection states, operating as a bridge between waking consciousness and the dream realms through sustained mental focus and intentional relaxation of the physical body. When you engage in deep meditation before sleep, you create a state of profound inner stillness where your conscious mind becomes progressively quieter, allowing the natural barrier between waking awareness and dream consciousness to become increasingly permeable and malleable. The practice typically begins with finding a comfortable position, whether sitting or lying down, and then systematically directing your attention inward through focused breathing, body awareness, or mantra repetition, gradually descending through layers of mental activity until you reach a state where your ordinary thoughts dissolve and your sense of individual identity begins to soften at its edges. The psychological mechanism underlying this technique involves the progressive deactivation of your default mode network, the brain region responsible for self-referential thinking and ego maintenance, which naturally occurs when you maintain sustained attention on a single focal point rather than allowing your mind to wander through the usual narrative patterns. As your brain shifts into deeper meditative states characterized by increased theta wave activity, the rigid boundaries that normally separate your conscious awareness from your subconscious mind begin to dissolve, creating an ideal psychological environment for spontaneous lucid dream emergence and the potential separation of consciousness from physical form. What remains remarkable despite our scientific understanding of these neurological processes is how rarely people actually implement consistent meditation practice as a nightly preparation for sleep, treating it instead as an occasional wellness activity rather than recognizing its extraordinary potential as a gateway to expanded states of consciousness and dimensional exploration. Imagine yourself in a dimly lit room, sitting comfortably before a single lit candle positioned at eye level, approximately 2 to 3 feet away from your body, its flickering flame dancing gently in the still air as your eyes remain softly focused upon that warm, luminous point of light. You maintain this gentle gaze without straining, allowing your vision to relax into a natural soft focus, noticing how the flame seems to breathe and pulse with an almost organic rhythm, drawing your complete attention into the present moment while your mind gradually releases its grip on the constant stream of daily thoughts and worries. The mechanism underlying this technique operates through multiple neurological pathways simultaneously, as the sustained focus on a single point of light triggers what is known as the hypnagogic state, a transitional zone between wakefulness and sleep, where the visual cortex begins to shift its processing patterns and your conscious mind gradually loosens its executive control over your thoughts and perceptions. The warm, orange glow of the candle flame naturally encourages melatonin production while simultaneously maintaining just enough sensory stimulation to prevent complete mental drift, creating a delicate balance that allows your brain to transition smoothly towards sleep while maintaining enough awareness to potentially recognize and sustain a lucid dream state. What remains fascinating is how this ancient practice, documented across countless meditative and spiritual traditions throughout human history, continues to produce measurable effects on brainwave patterns despite our modern understanding of neuroscience offering us many technological alternatives for inducing altered states of consciousness. The 61 points technique represents one of the oldest and most systematically documented methods for inducing lucid dreaming and astral projection, originating from ancient Tibetan Buddhist practices and later refined through various esoteric traditions across multiple cultures and centuries. The practice involves mentally scanning and mentally touching, with conscious awareness and deliberate intention, exactly 61 specific points distributed across the entire surface and interior of the human body, beginning at the crown of the head and proceeding methodically downward in a predetermined sequence that follows energetic pathways long recognized in traditional medicine systems. As you lie in your bed in that precious moment between wakefulness and sleep, you begin by bringing your complete attention to the very crown of your head, visualizing a point of light or energy, and then you mentally move to the next predetermined point, perhaps on the forehead, then the bridge of the nose, continuing this sequence with unwavering focus through all 61 locations mapped across your physical form. The mechanism behind this technique operates on several interconnected psychological principles, primarily that the sustained focus required to accurately navigate 61 points without losing count or sequence creates a state of heightened awareness that prevents the mind from slipping into ordinary sleep, while simultaneously preparing the subtle body for conscious projection through a process of energy redistribution and chakra activation. By maintaining this precise mental attention while your physical body grows increasingly heavy and numb, you create a profound dissociation between your conscious mind and your sleeping physical form, the very dissociation required for projection to occur naturally and safely. Begin by lying flat on your back in a comfortable position, allowing your entire body to settle into the surface beneath you, and start this practice by bringing your complete awareness to the crown of your head, noticing whatever sensations exist there without judgment or the need to change anything. Moving your attention slowly downward, you progressively scan through your forehead, releasing any tension you might find accumulated there, then shift your focus to your eyes, temples, and the muscles around them, observing how these delicate areas hold stress throughout our daily lives. Continue this methodical journey down through your cheeks, nose, and mouth, recognizing that even our facial muscles maintain a constant state of subtle contraction that we rarely notice until we deliberately bring awareness to them. As you move into your neck and throat region, you may discover tightness you were completely unaware of, and simply by observing this tension without attempting to force relaxation, your nervous system naturally begins to downregulate and release these held patterns. The psychological mechanism at work here stems from the fundamental principle that conscious awareness itself creates change in the body, a phenomenon often explained through the connection between attention and the parasympathetic nervous system, which activates when we focus calmly on bodily sensations rather than external threats. Your brain, when directed to scan systematically rather than worry erratically, shifts into a state of observation rather than reaction, and this observational stance inherently calms the amygdala and reduces cortisol production. By moving your awareness through each region methodically, you create a circuit of gentle attention that signals safety to your entire organism. Progressive relaxation is a systematic technique where you deliberately tense and then release different muscle groups throughout your body in a sequential manner, moving from one area to another with careful attention and intentionality. You begin by selecting a specific muscle group, perhaps your feet or your hands, and you consciously contract those muscles for several seconds, creating deliberate tension and noticing the sensation of tightness and resistance. And then you suddenly release that tension and observe the dramatic contrast between the state of contraction and the state of relaxation that follows. As you move through each successive muscle group in your body, whether it be your calves, your thighs, your abdomen, your chest, your shoulders, your arms, your neck, or your face, you create a progressive wave of awareness and release that gradually encompasses your entire physical form. The mechanism behind this technique operates on a fundamental principle of human neurology and physiology, which is that your nervous system cannot simultaneously maintain states of deep tension and deep relaxation in the same muscle groups, and by deliberately cycling through tension and release, you train your body to recognize and achieve increasingly profound states of muscular relaxation while simultaneously signaling to your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems that threat has passed and safety is present. Your mind becomes focused entirely on the sensations of your body rather than on anxious thoughts or racing mental patterns, creating a meditation through physical sensation rather than through breath or visualization alone. The muscle tensing technique, also known as progressive muscle relaxation or the body scan tension method, begins with a deliberate and conscious process of tightening specific muscle groups throughout your body in a systematic sequence, holding each contraction for several seconds before releasing the tension, and observing the profound difference between the state of muscular strain and the state of deep relaxation that follows immediately afterward. You would typically start with your toes or feet, creating a noticeable tension by curling them tightly, then releasing and feeling the warmth and heaviness flood into that region, and then methodically progressing upward through your calves, thighs, buttocks, abdomen, chest, hands, forearms, biceps, shoulders, neck, and finally the facial muscles, taking time with each area to really understand what true relaxation feels like in contrast to what tension feels like. The psychological mechanism underlying this technique is rooted in the principle of contrast awareness, where your nervous system becomes acutely attuned to the distinction between tension and relaxation. And this heightened awareness actually facilitates a deeper descent into relaxation because your body now has a clear reference point of what you are trying to achieve. When you tense a muscle group deliberately, you are essentially forcing your sympathetic nervous system to engage momentarily, creating a small stress response. And then when you release that tension, your parasympathetic nervous system activates in a rebound effect that is far more profound than if you had simply tried to relax without the preceding tension. This creates a biofeedback loop where your consciousness becomes intimately familiar with the sensations of your own musculature, and this familiarity breeds a sense of control and body awareness that naturally quiets the racing mind. Anchor breathing is a technique where you select a specific physical sensation or anchor point within your body, typically the natural rhythm of your breath as it passes through a particular location, and you direct your complete awareness toward this singular focal point as you prepare yourself for sleep and the transition into lucid dreaming or astral projection. The most common anchor point is the nostrils, where you can feel the subtle temperature differential between the incoming and outgoing breath, creating a natural point of focus that requires no external tools or modifications to your environment. As you lie in bed in that twilight state between wakefulness and sleep, you begin to notice the cool air entering your nasal passages on the inhale and the warmer air leaving on the exhale, and you anchor your entire consciousness to this cyclical sensation, allowing it to become the gravitational center around which all of your attention orbits. The psychological mechanism behind anchor breathing operates on the principle of attentional narrowing, whereby the mind naturally loses its capacity to generate random thoughts and anxious narratives when it is completely consumed by a singular, repetitive, and neutral stimulus that requires continuous but gentle monitoring. By anchoring yourself to your breath rather than to visual imagery or complex mental constructs, you bypass the cognitive machinery that typically keeps you trapped in the waking world, because the breath operates partially outside the domain of conscious thought, existing in a liminal space between voluntary and involuntary nervous system regulation. Breath counting is a deceptively simple yet profoundly effective technique that anchors your conscious awareness to the natural rhythm of your respiratory cycle, creating a bridge between wakefulness and the hypnagogic state where lucid dreaming becomes possible. As you lie in bed preparing for sleep, you begin by taking a deep, deliberate breath through your nose, holding it for a moment, and then exhaling slowly through your mouth, all while mentally counting each complete breath cycle as a single unit. You continue this process, counting from 1 to 10, and when you reach 10, you simply begin again at 1, maintaining this gentle numerical progression throughout the entire descent into sleep. The mechanism underlying breath counting's effectiveness operates on multiple levels simultaneously, as the focused attention required to track each breath naturally quiets the mind's tendency toward racing thoughts and worry, while the rhythmic nature of breathing itself activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for promoting relaxation and preparing the body for sleep. Furthermore, by concentrating on this singular, repetitive anchor point, you are essentially training your consciousness to remain present and aware even as your body begins to drift into deeper states of relaxation, which is precisely the condition necessary for maintaining lucidity within dreams. The counting itself serves as a continuous thread of awareness that can follow you through the various stages of sleep, and if practiced consistently, this thread may remain unbroken even as your physical body enters REM sleep and dreaming begins. What is particularly remarkable about breath counting is how seamlessly it works despite being fundamentally a practice rooted in our ordinary biological functions. Yet we rarely consider our breathing with such intentional awareness in daily life, having normalized the automatic nature of respiration to the point where we have almost forgotten that we can consciously direct and observe this essential process. The practice of focusing on your breath as a gateway to lucid dreaming and astral projection represents one of the most ancient and accessible techniques available to those seeking altered states of consciousness, requiring nothing more than your own natural biological rhythm and the capacity to redirect your attention inward with deliberate intention. When you begin this practice, you position yourself in a comfortable reclined state, perhaps lying in bed or on a cushion, and you allow your eyes to close while you gradually bring your full awareness to the sensation of air moving through your nostrils, filling your lungs, and then releasing back out into the world around you. With each complete breath cycle, you notice the subtle expansion of your chest and abdomen, the slight pause at the peak of inhalation, the gentle contraction as the carbon dioxide leaves your body, and the momentary stillness before the next breath begins its natural course. The mechanism underlying this technique operates through what neuroscientists understand as the anchoring of attention, wherein the breath serves as a fixed point upon which consciousness can settle when the mind begins its inevitable wandering into thought patterns and mental chatter. Your brain naturally produces theta wave activity during this focused attention state, the same frequency associated with drowsiness and the hypnagogic threshold where dreams emerge and reality begins to dissolve. And by maintaining gentle awareness of your breathing, you create the neurological conditions necessary for consciousness to remain partially aware as your body transitions into sleep. The breath becomes a thread connecting your waking self to the dream realms beyond, a lifeline of awareness that prevents you from losing consciousness entirely while simultaneously allowing your rational mind to relax its grip on perception. As you settle into your resting position, begin to notice the impulse within your body to move, to shift, to adjust even the smallest limb or muscle group. And instead of acting on this impulse, you create a deliberate intention to remain in absolute physical stillness. This technique operates on the principle that the body and mind are constantly engaged in a subtle dialogue of motion and adjustment, where the nervous system sends countless microsignals requesting repositioning, stretching, and movement throughout the day and night. When you lie down to sleep, your natural instinct is to honor these signals, to roll from side to side, to flex your fingers, to shift your head on the pillow, creating a constant state of adjustment that keeps your consciousness tethered to bodily awareness. By deliberately choosing total stillness, you interrupt this dialogue and signal to your mind that there is no threat, no discomfort urgent enough to require movement, which paradoxically allows your nervous system to relax more deeply than it would through any amount of restless repositioning. The psychological mechanism at work here involves the concept of somatic quieting, wherein the reduction of physical movement creates a corresponding reduction in sensory feedback to the brain, allowing consciousness to gradually disengage from body-based awareness and drift toward the threshold states where lucid dreaming and astral projection become possible. This state of complete physical stillness also mirrors the paralysis that naturally occurs during rapid eye movement sleep, thereby training your consciousness to remain aware and present as your body enters this naturally immobilized state. What makes this technique particularly compelling is how we have normalized constant movement as a sign of comfort and wellness. Yet this very movement perpetuates wakefulness by maintaining the sensory loop between body and mind, suggesting that the deeper rest and expanded consciousness we seek may actually require us to embrace the counterintuitive practice of absolute physical immobility. Close your eyes in a darkened room and begin to notice the subtle visual phenomena that emerge from the darkness itself. A gentle display of light and color that exists entirely within your visual system rather than in the external world. These fleeting patterns, known as phosphenes, manifest as small points of light, geometric shapes, waves, or swirling colors that dance across the inner landscape of your closed eyelids, and they appear most vividly when you are in a deeply relaxed state just before sleep begins to overtake your consciousness. The practice of watching phosphenes involves deliberately focusing your attention on these naturally occurring visual phenomena, allowing them to become the singular object of your awareness as you drift deeper into the hypnagogic state, that liminal zone between wakefulness and sleep, where the boundaries of perception become increasingly blurred and malleable. As you observe these gentle lights and patterns without judgment or resistance, maintaining a passive curiosity about their movements and transformations, you begin to notice that they follow certain rhythms and seem to respond to your breathing, your heart rate, and the subtle fluctuations of your consciousness itself. The mechanism behind phosphenes originates in the spontaneous firing of neurons in your visual cortex, a process that occurs naturally when the eye receives minimal external stimulus and when the brain enters a state of reduced sensory processing, and this neural activity creates the illusion of light and movement even though no actual light is entering your eyes. What makes this phenomenon particularly fascinating is how seamlessly your mind accepts these internally generated images as a valid form of visual experience, integrating them into your perceptual reality with the same confidence it applies to the actual world around you, and this acceptance becomes a gateway to understanding how malleable consciousness truly is. Imagine yourself lying in bed in that twilight space between wakefulness and sleep, that liminal threshold where your conscious mind begins to dissolve into the dream state, and you become acutely aware of a subtle boundary forming within your consciousness itself. This is the awareness line, a technique that involves mentally tracking the precise moment when your rational thinking mind transitions into dream consciousness, essentially creating an invisible demarcation point between the two states of being. As you drift towards sleep, you maintain a thin thread of conscious observation, almost like a narrator commenting on your own descent, and you mentally note the exact instant when logical thought patterns begin to fragment and give way to the associative, symbolic language of dreams. The mechanism underlying this technique operates on the principle that consciousness exists not as a simple binary switch between on and off, but rather as a spectrum with infinite gradations, and by consciously attending to these gradations, you develop the ability to perceive the exact frequency shift that occurs during the transition. Your brain naturally generates different types of electrical activity at different stages of sleep onset, and when you focus awareness on detecting this change, you essentially train your consciousness to remain partially engaged even as the physical body enters deeper relaxation stages. What makes this technique particularly effective is that most people traverse this boundary every single night without any awareness of it whatsoever, sleepwalking through their own consciousness transition as if it were an unremarkable event rather than one of the most profound shifts that occurs in the human experience. And yet we have collectively normalized this unconsciousness to such a degree that we consider it perfectly natural to lose awareness of ourselves for hours at a time. As you settle into bed with the intention of entering a lucid dream state, you begin to count backwards from a number such as 100, but you do so with deliberate awareness and conscious attention to each individual number, rather than allowing your mind to drift into the mechanical recitation that typically accompanies counting. You maintain full consciousness of the act itself, observing each number as it passes through your awareness, noticing the texture of the number in your mind, the subtle shifts in your mental state with each descending increment, and the way your body gradually becomes heavier and more relaxed as you progress downward through the sequence. This technique leverages the fundamental principle that our minds are naturally drawn toward patterns and rhythmic structures, and by combining this natural inclination with a layer of conscious observation, you create a unique state of awareness that bridges the gap between wakefulness and sleep. The counting provides a focal point that prevents your mind from engaging in anxious thought patterns or random mental chatter, while the backward progression carries a symbolic weight in our psychological framework, as descending numbers are associated with moving inward, downward, and deeper into the layers of consciousness itself. What makes this technique particularly effective is that by maintaining conscious attention throughout the process, you remain aware at the threshold between waking and dreaming, which is precisely the state most conducive to lucid dreaming inception. The mechanism operates through a kind of attentional balance, where your conscious mind stays engaged through the counting activity, while your body and emotional centers gradually release into sleep, creating a state that neuroscientists might describe as hybrid consciousness. Falling asleep consciously is a paradoxical state where you maintain continuous awareness throughout the transition from wakefulness into sleep, observing your own descent into the dream world without losing the thread of consciousness that typically snaps when we drift off naturally. In ordinary sleep, there exists a threshold that our awareness simply cannot cross while remaining intact. We close our eyes, our thoughts become scattered and increasingly abstract, and then there is nothing until we wake again, with no memory of the precise moment when consciousness departed. However, when you deliberately cultivate the skill of conscious sleep onset, you learn to navigate this threshold with awareness still intact, observing the hypnagogic imagery that flickers at the edges of perception, noticing the peculiar bodily sensations that arise as your muscles relax into complete stillness, and maintaining a thread of observation even as your rational mind begins to dissolve into dream logic. The mechanism underlying this unusual state involves a careful balance between relaxation and attention. Your body must achieve the profound relaxation necessary for sleep onset, while your consciousness remains just alert enough to observe the process without triggering the arousal response that normally keeps us awake. This is achieved through specific breathing patterns, visualization techniques, and the cultivation of what might be called passive observation, where you watch what unfolds without trying to control or analyze it too intensely. What makes this technique particularly persistent in human experience, despite seeming like an unnatural inversion of how sleep normally operates, is the deep intuitive understanding that consciousness and sleep are not truly opposite states, but rather exist on a spectrum, and that the boundary between them is far more permeable than our everyday experience suggests. We have normalized the idea that sleep requires the complete absence of awareness, yet countless meditation practitioners and lucid dreamers have demonstrated that this boundary is something we can learn to navigate with intention and practice. As you lie in bed preparing for sleep, begin to deliberately amplify your awareness of each sensory input that reaches your consciousness, starting with the most subtle and distant sensations available to your perceptual apparatus. Notice how the weight of your body presses against the mattress beneath you, and rather than allowing this sensation to fade into the background of your awareness as it normally would, consciously intensify your focus upon it, imagining that the pressure becomes more pronounced, more vivid, more impossible to ignore with each passing moment. This deliberate amplification of ordinary sensations creates a peculiar psychological state in which your mind remains engaged and alert, even as your body begins to relax into the natural rhythms of sleep onset. The mechanism behind this technique operates through a fundamental characteristic of human attention, that consciousness cannot simultaneously suppress and amplify the same stimulus, and by choosing amplification, you prevent the automatic habituation that typically allows sensations to disappear from awareness. As you continue this practice, expand your amplification to include the temperature variations across your skin, the subtle sounds in your environment that you would normally filter out, the quality of the air as it enters and exits your nostrils, and the faint visual patterns that persist behind your closed eyelids. This technique maintains a delicate balance between the active engagement of your conscious mind and the progressive relaxation of your physical body, creating the ideal conditions for the threshold state between waking and dreaming consciousness. What makes this approach particularly effective is that despite our logical understanding that these sensations have been present all along, amplifying them creates an almost entirely new perceptual experience, as though you have suddenly awakened to aspects of reality that existed but remained invisible through simple inattention, allowing your consciousness to shift into the hypnagogic state where lucid dreaming becomes accessible. The afternoon nap represents a peculiar window of opportunity that exists in the liminal space between the demands of daytime consciousness and the inevitability of evening sleep, occurring when the body experiences a natural dip in circadian alertness, typically between 1 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a phenomenon documented across cultures and generations as the post-lunch energy decline that affects nearly everyone regardless of what they have consumed. During this specific time window, the conditions become remarkably aligned for inducing awake-induced lucid dream through what practitioners call the wild technique, which requires maintaining consciousness while the body enters sleep, a feat that becomes substantially easier when attempted during this afternoon period because the sleep pressure is moderate rather than overwhelming, allowing the conscious mind to remain as a thin thread of awareness while muscular atonia gradually begins to establish itself. The mechanism operates on the principle that afternoon sleepiness represents a genuine biological drive towards sleep rather than mere suggestion or habit, meaning the body is genuinely prepared to enter sleep stages. Yet the time constraints of an afternoon nap create a psychological understanding that sleep will be brief and voluntary, which paradoxically allows the conscious mind to relax its iron grip on wakefulness without fear of losing itself completely to unconsciousness. What makes this technique particularly effective is that the afternoon nap exists in a peculiar zone of permission and expectation in most modern schedules, where if sleep fails to occur, the lost time feels less consequential than losing evening sleep would, thereby reducing the performance anxiety that typically sabotages wild attempts and instead allowing a gentle surrender to the process. The strategic afternoon nap represents one of the most accessible yet underutilized pathways toward lucid dreaming, a practice that cultures across the globe have recognized for centuries, though modern Western society has largely abandoned it in favor of consolidated nighttime sleep. When you take a deliberate nap lasting between 20 minutes and 2 hours, particularly during the early afternoon hours when your circadian rhythm naturally dips, you create a unique neurological window where the boundary between waking consciousness and dream awareness becomes extraordinarily thin and permeable. During these shorter sleep cycles, your brain often enters the REM stage more rapidly than it would during a full nighttime sleep session, a phenomenon known as sleep onset REM or SOREM, which means you transition directly from waking awareness into the dream state without the usual intermediate stages of light sleep that typically obscure your conscious participation in dreams. The mechanism behind this heightened lucidity potential during naps relates to the fundamental way your brain consolidates information and processes memories. As the afternoon nap taps into your natural biphasic sleep tendencies that were far more common before industrialization fundamentally restructured human sleep patterns into the rigid 8-hour monophasic blocks we now consider normal. Your conscious mind remains partially engaged even as your body surrenders to sleep, creating a liminal space where you can observe the dream formation process itself, sometimes even maintaining a thread of self-awareness as you enter and navigate the dream landscape with remarkable clarity and intentionality. Yet despite this profound biological advantage and the centuries of historical precedent supporting napping as a legitimate sleep practice, modern society continues to pathologize and stigmatize the daytime nap as laziness or indulgence, rather than recognizing it as a powerful tool for both cognitive enhancement and the cultivation of lucid dreaming experiences. The moment you wake up, before your mind fully orients itself to the demands of the day, there exists a brief window of extraordinary opportunity where the dreams you have just experienced remain vivid and accessible in your conscious awareness. This fleeting interval, lasting anywhere from a few seconds to perhaps a few minutes depending on how quickly your brain transitions from sleep to wakefulness, contains the most precious resource for anyone seeking to develop lucid dreaming abilities, the memory of your dreams themselves. Most people squander this window entirely by immediately reaching for their phone, checking the time, or allowing the cascade of daily thoughts and concerns to flood their consciousness, which effectively washes away the fragile dream memories like footprints in sand before an incoming tide. The practice of morning recall involves deliberately halting this automatic process and instead remaining still upon waking, keeping your eyes closed if possible, and consciously attempting to retrieve and solidify whatever dream fragments you can access from your recent sleep cycle. The mechanism underlying why this practice proves so effective relates to how memory consolidation operates during the transition between sleep and wakefulness, where the neural pathways containing your dream experiences remain temporarily accessible before they fade into the background noise of your brain activity. By deliberately focusing your attention on these ephemeral memories before engaging with external stimuli, you strengthen the neural connections associated with dream recall, essentially training your brain to prioritize the encoding and retention of dream content in your long-term memory systems. Over time, this consistent morning practice of pausing and reflecting creates a feedback loop where you remember more dreams, which allows you to practice more, which further reinforces your ability to remember, establishing a momentum that eventually leads to spontaneous dream recall throughout the day and a dramatically increased likelihood of recognizing the dream state while you are actually dreaming. The practice of maintaining a consistent sleep schedule involves going to bed at the same time each evening and waking at the same time each morning, creating a rhythm that persists day after day, week after week, and ideally throughout months and years of your life. This means that regardless of whether you feel tired or energized, regardless of social obligations or sudden opportunities for late-night activities, you return to bed at your designated hour and rise at your predetermined awakening time, establishing a predictability that your body comes to anticipate and prepare for with biological precision. Over time, as you honor this schedule with dedication, your circadian rhythm begins to synchronize with these external markers. Your cortisol levels rise predictably before your alarm sounds. Your melatonin production initiates at the approach of your bedtime, and your digestive system, your cognitive functions, and your emotional regulation all calibrate themselves to this stable temporal framework that you have created through repetition and commitment. The mechanism underlying this phenomenon operates through your body's internal timing systems, which evolved across millennia to respond to the cycling of light and darkness, to seasonal changes, and to the predictable patterns of your environment. Your brain contains a master clock located in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a collection of specialized cells that orchestrates all subordinate biological rhythms throughout your body, and this master clock responds powerfully to consistent temporal cues, adjusting and fine-tuning itself based on the reliability of your behavioral patterns. The weekend sleep-in represents one of the most universally practiced yet remarkably underexplored phenomena in modern sleep culture, where individuals deliberately delay their morning awakening by several hours beyond their typical weekday schedule, allowing themselves to remain in bed long after sunrise and often extending their sleep cycles well into the late morning hours. This practice emerges naturally from the accumulated sleep debt that most people accumulate throughout the standard work week, where alarm clocks, professional obligations, and social commitments force individuals to wake at predetermined times that rarely align with their natural circadian rhythms or genuine sleep requirements. When the weekend arrives and external pressure releases its grip, the body's sleep system responds by extending the total sleep duration, allowing for longer periods in the deeper sleep stages and more extended REM cycles, which explains why weekend sleep often feels profoundly restorative compared to rushed weekday mornings. The psychological mechanism underlying weekend sleep-ins involves both physiological catch-up and a form of temporal liberation, where the mere knowledge that no alarm awaits creates a mental state conducive to deeper relaxation and more stable sleep architecture, since the anticipatory anxiety of time management dissolves into acceptance of an open-ended morning. The brain recognizes the absence of time pressure and communicates this safety signal throughout the nervous system, allowing the body to prioritize sleep maintenance over the light sleep stages that typically precede forced waking, and this neurological shift actually enhances the quality of sleep during these extended periods. What remains remarkable is how thoroughly we have normalized the deprivation of weekday sleep while simultaneously accepting the necessity of weekend compensation, creating a cyclical pattern where we rob ourselves of adequate rest for 5 days only to attempt recovery in 2, all while the fundamental need for consistent, sufficient sleep remains constant regardless of the day of the week. In the modern world, the average person spends several hours each day staring at illuminated screens, whether those screens belong to smartphones, tablets, computers, or televisions, and this behavior has become so deeply embedded in our daily routines that we rarely pause to consider its profound impact on our ability to sleep and to achieve the heightened states of consciousness necessary for lucid dreaming and astral projection. The blue light emitted from these devices actively suppresses the production of melatonin, the hormone responsible for regulating our circadian rhythm and signaling to our body that it is time to rest, while simultaneously the constant stimulation from notifications, messages, videos, and infinite scrolling keeps our minds in a state of heightened alertness and engagement that is fundamentally incompatible with the gradual mental quieting required to transition into deep sleep or into a lucid dream state. When we spend the hours immediately before bedtime immersed in screen-based content, we are essentially telling our nervous system to remain activated and vigilant, to process information rapidly, to seek the next source of stimulation, and to maintain focus on external inputs rather than turning our awareness inward toward the subtle sensations and hypnagogic imagery that precede sleep, and that form the gateway to lucid dreaming experiences. The mechanism is straightforward and well documented by neuroscience. The retinas of our eyes contain photoreceptor cells that are uniquely sensitive to blue wavelengths of light, and when these cells are stimulated in the evening hours, they send signals to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain region that controls our sleep-wake cycle, essentially telling this region that it is still daytime and that sleep should be delayed. The scenario is remarkably common in modern life. A person sits at their desk in the late afternoon, perhaps around 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, feeling the inevitable energy dip that comes as their circadian rhythm naturally begins to shift toward evening. Without much deliberation, they reach for a cup of coffee, an energy drink, or perhaps a caffeinated tea, believing that this boost will carry them through their remaining work hours or evening activities. What occurs in this moment is a direct interference with the body's ability to prepare for sleep, yet this practice persists as a normalized part of daily routine for millions of people worldwide. The caffeine enters the bloodstream and begins its work almost immediately, blocking adenosine receptors in the brain, which are responsible for creating the sensation of sleepiness and fatigue. This mechanism is efficient and powerful, and it can keep a person alert for many hours, sometimes 5, 6, or even 8 hours depending on their sensitivity and the amount consumed. The problem emerges when this artificial alertness extends into the evening and night hours, directly competing with the body's natural desire to enter sleep. The person may find themselves lying in bed hours later, mind racing and body tense, unable to understand why sleep seems impossible despite feeling tired during the day. What makes this situation particularly interesting from a psychological perspective is that people often fail to connect their late afternoon caffeine consumption with their nighttime insomnia, instead attributing their sleeplessness to stress, anxiety, or various other factors entirely unrelated to their beverage choices. The human brain has become so accustomed to caffeinated culture that consuming stimulants throughout the day feels completely normal and necessary, even when the logical consequences are clear and predictable. Consider the precise moment when your body exists in a state of optimal hydration, where every cell contains the exact amount of fluid necessary for proper function, where your blood maintains its ideal viscosity, and where your brain, which itself is composed of roughly 73% water, operates at peak efficiency without the constant subtle signals of thirst or the heaviness of excess fluid retention that can interfere with the onset of sleep. This delicate equilibrium is far more nuanced than the common directive to simply drink 8 glasses of water daily. For hydration balance involves understanding the timing of fluid consumption, the minerals and electrolytes that accompany that water, and the intricate relationship between your hydration state and your capacity to enter the relaxed mental conditions necessary for lucid dreaming and astral projection. When you are dehydrated, even mildly, your brain becomes hyperactive as it attempts to compensate for the reduction in cerebrospinal fluid, triggering a subtle vigilance that keeps your consciousness slightly elevated and prevents the necessary descent into deep relaxation. Conversely, when you consume too much fluid close to sleep, your body becomes preoccupied with managing excess fluid, your bladder sends persistent signals, and your nervous system remains engaged in processes of elimination rather than the parasympathetic activation required for profound sleep states. The mechanism underlying hydration balance operates through multiple physiological pathways simultaneously, including osmotic pressure regulation, vasopressin release, blood pressure homeostasis, and the electrical conductivity of neural tissue itself. Your neurons depend upon a specific ratio of intracellular and extracellular fluid to maintain the ion gradients that allow electrical signals to propagate efficiently. And when this balance shifts, the quality of your cognitive experience changes in ways both dramatic and imperceptible, creating subtle resistance to the threshold states where consciousness begins to fragment and dissolve into dream. The physical environment in which you prepare for sleep exerts a profound influence over your neurological state and your capacity to achieve lucidity within the dream realm. And one of the most foundational elements of this environmental optimization involves the complete elimination of light from your sleeping space. When you enter a room shrouded in absolute darkness, free from the intrusion of streetlights filtering through windows, the glow of electronic devices casting their pale luminescence across surfaces, or any ambient light source that might penetrate your eyelids even as they remain closed, your body undergoes a cascade of neurochemical changes that prepare it for the deepest possible sleep. The pineal gland, often called the third eye in esoteric traditions, responds to darkness by increasing its production of melatonin, the hormone that governs your circadian rhythms and facilitates the transition from wakefulness into the various stages of sleep. And this biological mechanism operates independently of your conscious awareness or intention. The darkness essentially communicates to every cell in your body that it is time to surrender to sleep, that the external world has ceased its demands, and that your consciousness can safely venture into the realm of dreams where lucidity becomes possible. The psychological mechanism underlying this effect operates on multiple levels simultaneously. For darkness not only triggers melatonin production, but also eliminates the visual stimuli that keep your waking mind engaged and alert, those constant micro-observations and environmental assessments that your brain performs unconsciously throughout your waking hours. When light is present, your eyes continue to gather information even in the periphery, and this sensory input maintains a thread of consciousness tethered to physical reality, preventing the complete mental release necessary for deep sleep and dreaming. The human body, when preparing for sleep, naturally seeks a configuration that minimizes tension and maximizes support across its various pressure points. And this instinctive search for comfort becomes particularly crucial when attempting to achieve the deep relaxation necessary for lucid dreaming and astral projection. The practice of finding comfortable positioning involves consciously arranging your body in such a way that your spine maintains its natural curvature. Your neck remains neutrally aligned with your vertebrae, and your limbs feel neither compressed nor extended in ways that might trigger discomfort or muscle tension during the crucial hours of the night. Many practitioners discover that the supine position, lying flat on your back with a pillow supporting the natural curve of your neck, and perhaps another pillow beneath your knees to maintain spinal alignment, creates an optimal foundation for these practices, though some individuals find that side sleeping with proper shoulder and hip support proves more conducive to their particular physiology and comfort requirements. The mechanism underlying comfortable positioning's effectiveness relates to the fundamental principle that physical discomfort generates neurological signals that continuously pull your conscious attention toward the affected area, essentially anchoring your awareness to your body rather than allowing it to drift toward the expanded states of consciousness required for lucid dreaming and astral projection. When your body feels supported and unstressed, your nervous system can downregulate its vigilance, your breathing becomes more natural and rhythmic, and your mind encounters fewer interruptions from the persistent microadjustments that uncomfortable positioning demands throughout the night. When you lie in bed at night with the intention to enter a lucid dream or achieve astral projection, you might find yourself overwhelmed by the sheer silence of your bedroom, a silence that paradoxically amplifies every small sound, every creak of the house, every distant car passing by on the street outside, each noise jolting your awareness back to your physical body and disrupting the delicate process of consciousness dissolving into the dream state. White noise focus is a technique that addresses this problem by introducing a consistent, unchanging auditory stimulus that occupies just enough of your conscious attention to prevent external sounds from breaking your concentration, while simultaneously allowing your mind to gradually fade into deeper states of awareness. You would begin this practice by selecting a white noise source, whether that be a dedicated white noise machine, a fan in your room, a white noise application on your phone or computer, or even a YouTube video designed specifically for sleep and meditation, and adjusting the volume to a level that is noticeable but not intrusive, a level where the sound forms a gentle auditory blanket rather than a forceful presence. As you settle into your relaxation techniques or chosen induction method, whether through progressive muscle relaxation, body scanning, or visualization, you allow your attention to rest lightly upon the white noise itself, noticing its constancy, its predictability, and the way it fills the acoustic space around you with an even, unchanging quality that the brain finds deeply soothing. The mechanism behind white noise focus operates on the principle of selective attention and the brain's remarkable ability to habituate to constant stimuli while remaining alert to changes within that stimuli. Aromatherapy cues represent a sophisticated approach to priming your mind and body for lucid dreaming and astral projection by establishing olfactory anchors that bridge your waking consciousness with your sleeping state. The practice involves selecting a specific essential oil or natural scent that you introduce into your environment during your meditation and sleep preparation routine, allowing your olfactory system to develop a strong associative connection between that particular aroma and the mental state you wish to achieve. You might choose lavender for its calming properties, or perhaps sandalwood for its historically documented connection to spiritual practices and altered states of consciousness. And you would diffuse this scent in your bedroom using an aromatherapy diffuser, apply it to your pillow, or place a sachet near your sleeping area so that the aroma surrounds you as you drift towards sleep. The mechanism at work here is rooted in the extraordinary power of the olfactory system, which connects directly to the limbic system and the hippocampus in your brain, the regions responsible for emotion, memory formation, and the transition between different states of consciousness. When you consistently pair a specific scent with your intention to achieve lucidity, your brain begins to recognize that aroma as a signal to enter the appropriate mental state, much like how a particular song might instantly transport you back to a specific memory, or how the smell of coffee can signal the beginning of your day. Over time, this olfactory cue becomes so deeply embedded in your neurological pathways that simply encountering that scent as you fall asleep can automatically trigger the neural patterns associated with lucid dreaming and increased dream awareness, essentially creating a shortcut for your consciousness to access these heightened states. Throughout your waking life, you experience gravity as an absolute constant, a force so fundamental and omnipresent that you never question its validity or its necessity in maintaining the structure of reality around you. Objects fall when you release them, your feet remain planted firmly on the ground, and the sensation of weight pressing down through your body becomes so normalized that you cease to notice it entirely, accepting it as simply the way things must be. This phenomenon operates at such a deep level of your consciousness that gravity becomes invisible to you, woven into the very fabric of how you perceive and move through three-dimensional space, shaping every assumption you make about what is physically possible and what remains forever impossible. The psychological mechanism underlying this acceptance is rooted in repeated experience and evolutionary adaptation. For countless generations of your ancestors survived precisely because they understood and respected gravity's authority over matter, over movement, and over consequence. Your brain has evolved to expect gravity, to predict its effects, and to trust in its absolute dominion over the physical world, which means that any violation of gravitational law registers in your consciousness as fundamentally impossible, as a clear sign that something is profoundly wrong with your perception of reality. And yet, despite the ironclad logic supporting gravity's permanence in the waking world, you accept this reality so completely that you rarely pause to consider how remarkable it truly is that something invisible can hold you down with such absolute certainty. This acceptance persists even though you cannot actually see gravity or touch it, experiencing only its effects and trusting in the mathematical models that explain it. Consider the typical evening in modern life, where your mind races from one task to the next, your attention fragmented across multiple screens and responsibilities, your body still tense from the day's accumulated stress and stimulation. You lie in bed with your thoughts still accelerating, replaying conversations, planning tomorrow's events, cycling through worries and unfinished mental loops that seem to demand completion before rest can arrive. This mental velocity is so normalized in contemporary existence that we rarely pause to recognize how fundamentally incompatible it is with the neurological state required for sleep onset or for entering the deeper consciousness states where lucid dreaming becomes possible. The slowing down technique works by deliberately decelerating this mental and physiological momentum, creating a graduated transition from wakefulness to the hypnagogic threshold, where consciousness becomes malleable and dreamlike perception begins to emerge. The mechanism operates through the parasympathetic nervous system, which responds to deliberately reduced pace and intensity by downregulating arousal, lowering heart rate, reducing cortisol production, and allowing brain wave frequencies to shift from beta waves associated with active thinking toward alpha and theta waves associated with relaxation and dream states. Yet despite understanding intellectually that hurried minds cannot sleep well, and that our cultural obsession with speed works directly against restful consciousness, we continue to maintain these rapid internal rhythms right up until the moment we expect sleep to arrive, as though intensity and velocity could somehow be switched off instantaneously rather than requiring a gradual deceleration. Consider the experience of holding a specific object as you drift toward sleep, perhaps a smooth stone, a piece of fabric, or a personal item that carries particular weight in your memory. And notice how this simple act of tactile contact begins to create a bridge between your waking consciousness and the deeper states of sleep that follow. This technique operates on the principle that physical sensations can serve as reliable anchor points for your awareness, creating consistent reference markers that your mind learns to recognize and associate with the transition into lucid dreaming states. When you establish a regular practice of holding or touching a specific object during your pre-sleep routine, you are essentially training your nervous system to recognize this sensation as a signal, a cue that tells your deeper mind that you are entering the space where lucid dreaming becomes possible. The mechanism at work here involves the creation of what psychologists call a conditioned response, where repeated pairing of a physical sensation with a desired mental state eventually causes your brain to anticipate and facilitate that state whenever the sensation is introduced. Your tactile senses remain remarkably active even as your other sensory channels begin to quiet during the sleep onset process, and this makes physical sensation an exceptionally powerful anchor point for maintaining a thread of awareness as you move through the hypnagogic stages. What makes this technique particularly effective is that unlike visual or auditory anchors, which fade as external sensory input diminishes, the feeling of an object in your hand or against your skin persists and can even become more vivid and meaningful as your mind begins to turn inward. The object itself becomes a literal and metaphorical grounding point, something solid to return to whenever you feel your awareness slipping away entirely. And over time, your unconscious mind learns to use this sensation as a gateway into the lucid dream space. As you begin this final technique, settle yourself into a comfortable position and allow your breathing to become slow and deliberate, for what you are about to engage in is a practice that has existed across countless cultures and spiritual traditions for thousands of years. A simple yet profound method of anchoring your consciousness through the repetition of meaningful sounds or phrases that gradually rewire the relationship between your waking mind and the threshold of sleep. The process begins when you select a mantra, affirmation, or even a single syllable, something as simple as Om or I am aware, or perhaps a personalized phrase that resonates deeply with your intention to become lucid. And you begin to chant this silently or in a hushed whisper, maintaining a steady rhythm that synchronizes with your natural breathing patterns. Allowing the vibration and repetition to become the focal point of your attention as your body grows heavier and your mind begins its descent toward the sleep state. What makes this technique uniquely powerful is the psychological mechanism at work. The continuous repetition of the same phrase or sound creates a cognitive anchor that persists even as your conscious mind begins to fade, meaning that your awareness of the chant becomes the last thing to dissolve into sleep and the first thing to emerge as you enter the dream state, effectively maintaining a thread of consciousness that bridges the gap between wakefulness and unconsciousness. The human brain naturally gravitates toward pattern recognition and repetition, which is why advertising jingles and songs lodge themselves in our memory. Yet we rarely harness this same neurological principle deliberately for the purpose of expanding our consciousness during sleep, instead allowing our minds to wander chaotically into dreams without any anchoring mechanism to preserve our awareness.